It will be years before the Ukrainian Air Force has enough experience to execute combat missions effectively. That's what experts from the Center for Strategic and International Studies confidently declared in their June 11, 2024 paper on F-16 jets in Ukraine. But just a little over 6 months later, a Ukrainian pilot pulled off a move never before seen with the F-16 Fighting Falcon, and not just in Ukraine, anywhere in the world. This is the story of that remarkable achievement. The F-16 Fighting Falcon is no ordinary fighter jet, it's a battlefield legend. Known for its speed, precision, and adaptability, this jet can handle everything from air defense to devastating ground strikes. For Ukraine, the F-16 is a lifeline in the country's fight against a larger and better-equipped aggressor. The jet is supposed to give Ukraine the tools to hit more Russian targets and tilt the balance in the war. In that regard, 2024 marked a turning point. It's when the first F-16 jets finally arrived in Ukraine. They were first seen in early August. Before the month's end, they were used in combat for the first time. After years of relying on outdated Soviet-era planes, Ukraine finally received aircraft that could match and even outclass what the Russians had in their arsenal. But as hopeful as the Ukrainians were about this addition, they couldn't have imagined the incredible feat that was about to unfold. No one could, not even the most seasoned aviation experts. In fact, experts and analysts seemed more focused on the challenges the F-16 would face in Ukraine. They talked at length about the hurdles Ukraine would encounter when integrating these advanced jets into its tactics. They claim that the Ukrainian ground forces might have shown impressive adaptability with systems like HIMARS, but the country's air force had a much steeper climb. Ukrainian pilots would need time to adjust to the F-16's new cockpit design and advanced systems, something that could take years of training. And then on December 13th, a young Ukrainian pilot proved them all wrong. In a single combat sortie, this brave pilot destroyed 6 enemy cruise missiles, an unmatched feat for the F-16 Fighting Falcon. This achievement becomes even more impressive when you consider when it took place. On the morning of December 13th, Ukraine was thrust into one of its most intense and overwhelming battles since the full-scale invasion began. Russian forces launched an unprecedented aerial assault, a blitzkrieg of such magnitude that it could have brought Ukraine to its knees. The skies were filled with chaos as nearly 200 enemy drones swarmed in, joined by at least 94 air, sea, and land-based cruise missiles, along with the terrifying Kinzhal air-launched ballistic missiles. Russia was, as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky would later describe it, terrorizing millions of people. The assault targeted Ukraine's critical infrastructure, heavily focusing on the energy sector. The attack stretched across multiple regions, including Kyiv Oblast, Odessa, Vinnytsia, Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, and Cherkasy. In an extraordinary display of resilience, the Ukrainian forces managed to intercept 81 missiles, including the 11 downed by F-16s. This figure alone is a testament to the potency of the advanced fighter jets now in the Ukrainian arsenal. What's even more impressive is that 6 out of those 11 missiles were destroyed by a single pilot, according to Colonel Yuri Inat, the head of the public relations service of the Ukrainian Air Force Command. In a post shared on Facebook, Inat explained exactly what happened. During a massive attack by Russian troops in December 2024, a Ukrainian F-16 pilot destroyed 6 enemy cruise missiles in one combat sortie, his post said. These cruise missiles were precisely the pilot's primary target, even though they are incredibly difficult to intercept due to their speed and evasive capabilities. The F-16 pilot initially engaged with all 4 air-to-air missiles on board, successfully shooting down 4 cruise missiles. However, as the battle intensified, the pilot noticed additional targets closing in. But instead of using the remaining missiles, the pilot made a risky decision to rely on the aircraft's M61A1 6-barrel cannon. Sounds like a scene from Top Gun, doesn't it? Trust us, you haven't heard anything yet. The reason why we even know anything about this extraordinary feat is that the pilot told the story himself to Colonel Inat. So why settle for a brief summary of what happened in the skies on that December morning when you can hear the full play-by-play? We're about to tell you the story exactly as it was recounted by the pilot, but we'll let the drama of the moment unfold a little more vividly. Imagine this is a scene on the big screen, except it was a real story. A story of courage, precision, and split-second decisions. Buckle up, we're taking off. The F-16 zooms through the sky, the fighter jet's engine roaring as it closes in on a cluster of Russian cruise missiles. The guidance navigator locks onto a group of 8 enemy missiles, and the pilot brings the aircraft into position, checking the instruments. The missiles are coming in fast, so there's no time to hesitate. The pilot's focus sharpens as he navigates through the incoming missile threat, his jet systems pinging with alerts from the enemy's electronic warfare defenses. The missiles are scrambling the signal, but the F-16's radar cuts through the interference. The pilot doesn't let up. He has his target locked. At the optimal range, the Ukrainian pilot fires the first air-to-air missiles. It's a hit. The Russian missile explodes in a fiery burst. The next target is locked, and the pilot quickly launches the second missile. Another hit. A second Russian missile disappears in a flash of light. The pilot scans for the next target, calming his mind in the midst of the chaos unfolding around him. Without a pause, he turns his attention to the next pair of incoming missiles, already closing the gap. As he draws nearer, the jet's radar beeps, warning him about their proximity. The pilot started with 4 air-to-air missiles, medium and short range, but now he's down to just the short-range missiles. The pilot adjusts his approach, bringing the F-16 closer, flying in at just 2 miles, a dangerous maneuver with missiles still incoming. The first short-range missile launches. The Russian missile is obliterated. He wastes no time, quickly locking onto the next one. Another squeeze of the trigger, and the second short-range missile flies. Boom! Another explosion. Another direct hit. The pilot's pulse quickens, but his joy is boundless. He's just taken down 4 missiles. He saw the hits with his own eyes. But he isn't done just yet. The guidance navigator chimes again, and the pilot's instructed to leave the area and head to another position. His comrade flying the Su-27 will continue working on the targets. However, as he leaves the zone, his eyes flick to another threat on the horizon. Another missile heading toward Kyiv. Why not? Was all he thought to himself. As he informed the command, he was willing to keep going. With his fuel running low, he's only got one option left, the aircraft's rapid-fire cannon. There are no more missiles. He would have to take the missile heading for Kyiv with sheer precision. The missile is still far off, flying at over 400 miles per hour, a dangerous challenge. The pilot knows the risks. A detonation at this speed could destroy the aircraft. It could kill him in a second, but he has a job to do. A scene flashes before his eyes, his F-16 training in the United States. There, the only targets he shot down with an aircraft cannon were simulations, but this time, it's a real fight. In fact, it's as real as it gets, and there's no time for doubt. He adjusts his altitude, looking for the missile below, but it's not there. The pilot pulls up, climbs higher, and then swings the radar to find the missile. There it is! He lines up the shot. Only 550 yards to go. He takes a deep breath, then opens fire. The cannon bursts to life, its rounds ripping through the air. He watches, heart racing, as the first round hits its mark. There's an explosion as the missile detonates, but then another explosion. The pilot realizes too late what happened. There were 2 missiles traveling side by side in a shelf formation, a tactic used by the Russians to confuse the defenders, but this time, it didn't work. The pilot pulls away, making a sharp turn to assess the situation. The missile he'd just destroyed had a massive payload, almost 1,000 pounds of warhead. If it had detonated too close to the aircraft, it could have destroyed the jet in an instant, but it didn't. What happened instead was an awe-inspiring achievement. 6 enemy missiles were taken down in one sortie, 4 with missiles and 2 with his aircraft cannon. This is no Hollywood script. This is real life, and this brave Ukrainian pilot has just rewritten history. He even thought to himself, I probably set a record, and that he did. As Inat wrote in his post, the Ukrainian forces have 100% confirmation that an American F-16 fighter jet shot down 6 cruise missiles in an anti-aircraft battle, with 2 of them demolished by an aircraft cannon. And this was done by a Ukrainian, Inat proudly exclaimed. But even in the face of his monumental success, the pilot remained humble. He summed up this unparalleled achievement in 4 simple words. I tried, it worked. His focus was always on the mission, on the greater purpose, and on honoring those who made the ultimate sacrifice. I'm sure this experience will be useful to my colleagues, he concluded. Well, those colleagues welcomed him as the hero he is. As he landed, he was greeted with loud applause and cheers at the airfield. His fellow pilots and the technicians who prepare the planes for takeoff showered him with admiration. Even the leadership at Air Force Control couldn't hide their emotions as they celebrated the incredible achievement. But the admiration didn't stop there. Word of his success quickly spread beyond Ukraine's borders. The Americans who trained him were also taken aback by how their ward had performed in combat. This success also confirmed that the US decision to prioritize younger, less experienced pilots in the F-16 training program was the right one. This shift in strategy came as a response to Ukraine's urgent need for skilled pilots to bolster the country's air defenses against Russia, and it paid off in a big way. Initially, the US had trained only experienced Ukrainian pilots who had flown Soviet-era MiG jets. However, this group faced challenges with the Western-style training methods, as well as the language barrier. According to the Wall Street Journal, the decision to focus more on younger cadets was motivated by the shortage of experienced pilots and their increasing difficulty in adapting to new aircraft and training methods. Younger cadets, on the other hand, were thought to be more flexible and open to the new system, and they could undergo more intensive, faster training. This strategy was further supported by the fact that there were fewer experienced pilots available to be trained. The results of this shift were clear. In just a few months, a dozen pilots, many of them younger cadets, had graduated from the training program. All but one of them had already joined the fight in Ukraine, and they were now taking on missions that had previously been reserved for more seasoned airmen. The successful interception of these 6 cruise missiles by a pilot who had just undergone retraining in the US proved that the younger generation of pilots could indeed excel when given the tools, training, and experience they needed, and military experts certainly welcomed this excellence. Tim Robinson, a military aviation specialist with the UK's Royal Aeronautical Society, pointed out just how difficult it was to achieve such a feat. Describing the challenge, he noted that a cruise missile is quite a small target and is also flying quite low, making the interception especially impressive. Mark Kansian, a senior advisor on the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, offered further insights into the significance of the pilot's performance. He emphasized that the success of shooting down 6 missiles in a single sortie was not only a remarkable tactical achievement, but also a testament to the pilot's knowledge of the F-16 weaponry. "This pilot has mastered the F-16's weapons," he said, recognizing the level of technical competence involved. Kansian also highlighted the historical aspect, noting that 6 missiles in a single mission would likely set a record for the F-16. "Shooting down 6 cruise missiles in a single sortie is at the physical limits of the aircraft, so this would be a record if true," he explained. The sheer volume of missiles in the skies over Ukraine, he added, made this feat possible, though it was still something few pilots could achieve. After all, Western pilots typically face only 1 or 2 incoming missiles at a time. Retired US Army Major General Gordon "Skip" Davis, who had experience in NATO's Defense Investment Division, also weighed in on the achievement, praising the skill involved in shooting the aircraft's cannon to take down 2 cruise missiles. "Shooting 2 cruise missiles with the aircraft guns is quite impressive," he said. His comments highlighted the danger and precision required to use an aircraft cannon on such high-speed, evasive targets. The choice to engage with the cannon rather than missiles was an audacious decision that required quick thinking and a solid understanding of the aircraft's capabilities. Peter Layton, a fellow at the Griffith Asia Institute and a former Royal Australian Air Force officer, also praised the pilot's performance. He called the gun kill "good flying," while also stating that modern radars make targeting easier compared to World War II. Still, the pilot had to close in on the missile and fire very accurately. This reinforced the complexity of the task and how the pilot's performance wasn't just about the technology at their disposal, but about his expertise in using that technology effectively. However, no one understands what it truly took for the Ukrainian pilot to pull off this mission better than Colonel John Venable, a 25-year veteran of the US Air Force and former F-16 pilot. Venable's insights into the mission are not just informative, they're essential to understanding why this pilot's success was so groundbreaking. With decades of experience flying F-16s and understanding the risks of aerial combat, his perspective carries immense weight. Venable, who has seen it all in the cockpit, explained the unique challenge faced by this Ukrainian pilot in vivid terms. He likened the approach to a missile to driving onto a highway from an off-ramp, where you're at 90 degrees out and then you start to actually align your car with the highway as that on-ramp turns onto the road. This comparison depicts the skill needed to approach a missile at the right angle, without putting the aircraft in the danger zone of explosive debris. It's a subtle art of timing and positioning, where any degree off could mean disaster. The risk was magnified because the Ukrainian pilot wasn't using missiles anymore. As mentioned, he had run out, he was down to his aircraft's cannon, and still had to deal with a missile traveling at over 400 miles per hour. The pilot knew the stakes. A single shot could destroy the missile, but an explosion could tear apart his F-16. Venable, who's flown many missions himself, knows exactly how dangerous that is. Shooting down cruise missiles with a cannon is very risky because of the high speed of the target and the danger of detonation. Venable's words are powerful here. The fact that he did that without fragging himself says a lot about his skill set. For those unfamiliar with this military aviation term, being fragged means the aircraft absorbs debris from an exploding target. Essentially, you get torn apart by the very missile you're trying to destroy. What's more impressive was taking on not 1 but 2 incoming missiles, an absolute first in modern air combat with an F-16. As Venable explains, the complexity of hitting 2 targets at once can't be overstated. The fact that the pilot managed this feat with a weapon as risky as the aircraft's cannon is a testament to his exceptional flying abilities. This wasn't just a lucky shot, it was the product of training, skill, and above all, incredible courage. But what will this courage bring to the Ukrainian armed forces? Well, INAT is already focused on the future. According to him, young Ukrainian pilots prove every day that they are the best, whether in the cockpit of a Soviet or an American fighter. This accomplishment highlights not only the skill of individual pilots, but also the potential for Ukraine's future air defense. With 200 Ukrainian pilots already receiving basic training on F-16s in the UK and new batches of the aircraft on the way, the integration of these advanced jets could significantly strengthen Ukraine's defense posture. Khalino believes that more F-16s would mean a more robust air defense for Ukraine. This is crucial as Ukraine currently has a limited number of F-16s. Despite receiving its first jets in late July, only 11 pilots are currently flying them, with a full squadron strength of 40 jets. Increased numbers could mean greater coverage of Ukraine's skies, enhancing its ability to intercept Russian missiles and drones. Additionally, as Ukraine's air force gains more experience, this could help them match up against the technically advanced Russian jets. The delivery of additional F-16s, like the recent transfers from Denmark and the $266 million US sales package for F-16 support, shows a long-term commitment from international allies to bolster Ukraine's capabilities. Now, F-16s aren't miracle weapons, however they do represent a leap forward in modernizing Ukraine's air force. They're also laying the foundation for future upgrades, such as F-35s, that would only enhance this progress. But let's not move from the F-16s just yet. These aircraft might be part of Ukraine's present and future military capabilities, however their legacy is already steeped in combat success. The first time the F-16 Fighting Falcon truly made a name for itself was in Operation Desert Storm during the First Gulf War. This aircraft flew a mind-boggling 13,340 sorties in 1991, more than any other coalition aircraft. These jets attacked critical targets like airfields, missile sites, and military infrastructure. However, the first historic achievement came a year later, in 1992. On December 27, 1992, during Operation Southern Watch, F-16 pilot Lieutenant Colonel Gary North made history by shooting down an Iraqi MiG-25, the first ever aerial kill by an F-16. This engagement also marked the first use of the AIM-120 AMRAAM missile in combat, achieving a successful lock and kill. Fast forward to 1994, and an F-16 pilot made history once again. In February of that year, the pilot achieved the first single-mission triple kill since the Korean War. During Operation Deny Flight, Captain Robert Wright downed 3 Serbian J-21 Jastreb aircraft in a matter of minutes using AIM-120 AMRAAM and AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. This combat achievement was a major milestone for NATO, marking the first offensive action in over 4 decades and reinforcing the F-16's role in air dominance during peace enforcement operations. Of course, we can't talk about the F-16's biggest combat achievements without mentioning the time this aircraft saved 52 British special operators, well, 2 aircraft to be precise. In March 2003, during the Iraq War, 2 F-16s were called to assist British special operators who were surrounded by 500 Iraqi troops. With the night sky making it impossible to identify targets, one of the pilots, US Air Force Major Edward Lynch III, devised a bold plan. He dove to build up sonic energy, then broke the sound barrier over the enemy, creating a sonic boom that terrified the Iraqi forces into retreat. The British troops were able to escape unharmed, showcasing the F-16's unexpected but effective role in unconventional combat situations. And now Ukrainian pilots get to carry on this legacy, and as you've heard in this video, they're doing a great job. It's only a matter of time before they add another one of their records to this list. What do you think that one will be? And how do you explain their rapid progress with the F-16? It has been dubbed the largest missile and drone strike against Ukraine so far. On August 26, 2024, while still licking his wounds following the humiliation of the Kursk invasion, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a concentrated missile and drone attack that struck several cities in Ukraine. ABC News called it a nightmare strike that targeted 15 regions in the country, with Russia launching at least 127 missiles and 109 drones during an 8-hour attack. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky labeled the attack dastardly, while pointing out that Russia was once again using its missiles and drones to hit civilian infrastructure. By the end of the strike, at least 7 people were dead and another 47 injured, with 4 of those 47 being children, according to Ukraine's State Emergency Service. Still, it could have all been so much worse. The reason it wasn't is that Ukraine was able to defend against this missile and drone attack, not only with the air defense systems it's used since the beginning of Putin's special military operation, but with a weapons platform that Zelensky has long said Ukraine needed. A weapons system that's capable of shooting cruise missiles out of the sky and over time may help to put Ukraine on a more even footing with Russia in the aerial battle. We're talking about the F-16. As well as being the day in which Russia launched its largest missile and drone strike against Ukraine, August 26th also marked the first time that Ukraine used F-16s to fight against Russia. In this video, we're going to provide a full analysis of how Ukraine used its new multi-role fighters, what its plans for the F-16s are likely to be in the future, and the challenges it still faces in establishing any form of aerial superiority over Russia. But first, a recap. Since the beginning of the war, Zelensky has argued that American-made F-16s could play a huge role in helping Ukraine turn the tide. The planes, he believed, would allow Ukraine to create small pockets of air superiority over Russia's enemy, particularly when used as part of combined ground operations, as Ukraine attempts to seize back territory Russia had snatched from it. But Zelensky was made to wait, and wait. In July 2023, several countries including Norway, Denmark, Belgium and the Netherlands formed a fighter jet coalition through which they pledged to deliver 85 F-16s to Ukraine. That might give you the impression that Ukraine received these fighter jets in 2023, but that wasn't the case. Before those planes could be sent to Ukraine, its pilots needed to undergo an extensive training program to learn how to use them. After all, these are pilots who have traditionally used older Soviet-era platforms, such as the MiG-29, and it would take them months to get up to speed on the F-16. The American multi-role fighter traditionally has a training program that lasts for 18 months. Even with that training being fast-tracked into a 6-month program, it would still be a long time after the coalition commitment was made before the F-16s would arrive in Ukraine. "It's been 18 months and the planes have not reached us," Zelensky proclaimed in July 2024, adding that he believed having F-16s would help Ukraine to unblock the skies over his country. The good news for Zelensky was that he wouldn't have to wait much longer to get his hands on F-16s. On August 4, 2024, Zelensky stood at an unnamed airbase in Ukraine, flanked by 2 of the first batch of 6 F-16s the country had received. "F-16s in Ukraine, we did it," he said during the ceremony, in which he thanked the coalition leaders who had made this possible while stressing that Ukraine would need many more. Those extra F-16s will come. It's believed Ukraine will have received 20 of them by the end of 2024, with another 65 waiting in the wings. But these first 6 will go some way to boosting Ukraine's air force so it can move away from the old Soviet systems upon which it's been forced to rely. Fast forward a little over 3 weeks and we arrive at August 26th and Russia's nightmare missile and drone attack. It was time for the F-16s to show what they could do. Sandbox News provided details about how Ukraine is using its F-16s in its August 27th report on Russia's missile and drone strike. It noted that of the 127 missiles and 109 drones that Russia sent to Ukraine, the vast majority were intercepted or shot down before they reached their targets. Ultimately, 102 Russian missiles were downed, along with 99 of the 109 drones. Ukrainian anti-air defenses were credited with the majority of these interceptions, but Sandbox claims that reports were coming in that Ukraine had deployed its F-16s for the first time, with those multi-role fighters taking part in a defensive effort that saw them shoot down several cruise missiles that were on their way to Kyiv and other locations. From there, the report became more speculative. Sandbox revealed that it wasn't known how many of its F-16s Ukraine had deployed in this defensive role, or exactly what types of missiles the planes had shot down. It notes that it's very unlikely that the F-16s were used to take out ballistic missiles, such as the Iskander-M, as their flight profiles make them difficult for the F-16 to counter. Instead, Sandbox says, it's much more likely that these F-16s played a part in taking down the bevy of surface and air-launched cruise missiles that Russia threw into Ukraine. It points to the Russian Kh-101 and K-59, both of which it says operates more like tactical aircraft than ballistic missiles when they're in the sky. These missiles are powered by jet engines, similar to those used in older jets, giving them a heat signature for the F-16's missile systems to track. Because of those jet engines, the missiles also fly at lower altitudes and take a more horizontal flight path than ballistic missiles. However, the fact that they top out at speeds of between 600 and 700 miles per hour means they have no real means of defending themselves against a fighter jet that can fly faster and track them via their engines. Add to this that Ukraine has already revealed that the F-16s they've been showing off were seemingly loaded with air-to-air munitions, such as AIM-120B missiles and Sidewinder missiles capable of using infrared targeting, and it's clear that Ukraine intended to use its new planes as air defense assets. That's precisely what it appears to have done during Russia's extensive missile and drone attack, with the F-16s being used to take out cruise missiles, while Ukraine's other ground-based anti-air defenses focused on the ballistic missiles and drones. Sandbox says it's most likely that Ukraine was using AIM-9M Sidewinders, which have a range of around 10 miles, meaning any plane firing them would have to get up close and personal with a target, given that F-16s can fly at speeds of up to 1,345 miles per hour, as well as reaching cruising speeds of 577 miles per hour, it's very feasible that Ukraine used them to track, catch, and then obliterate these types of Russian cruise missiles. Sandbox notes were used in the attack. It's even possible, though perhaps unlikely, that Ukraine took advantage of the M61 Vulcan 20mm rotary cannon built into the F-16. These 6-barrel cannons can rattle off an impressive 7,200 rounds per minute, with the caveat being that they're only really effective when the F-16 is within 2,000 feet of its target. They may have been used, though they would have required a pilot to get very close to a cruise missile, creating the risk of a debris cloud upon contact that could damage the F-16. Still, from all of this, we gain some insight into how Ukraine is using its F-16s. This initial batch, at least, appears to be a supplement to the country's aerial defenses. The F-16s weren't deployed on or behind the front lines and have yet to be used by Ukraine in combined efforts with ground-based soldiers. Instead, they're taking out missiles intended for targets on the ground in Ukraine, with their likely focus being to take out cruise missiles that Ukraine's ground-based anti-air systems can't track. A second missile and drone attack, launched just 2 days after the Nightmare attack, offered more insight. Sadly, it also showed just how much risk an F-16 pilot takes whenever they climb into the cockpit. According to a report by the Task and Purpose YouTube channel, Russia launched a second missile volley at Ukraine on August 29th. This one wasn't as large as the Nightmare attack, as it involved just 5 missiles and 74 drones fired at Ukrainian power generation facilities. However, Ukraine responded by sending an F-16 to take out as much as it could. That's when tragedy struck. The F-16 sent to take out the missiles and drones was piloted by Colonel Alexei Mess, who Politico says had long been a fervent advocate of delivering advanced fighter jets to Ukraine. On August 29th, Mess, who went by the handle Moonfish, was piloting one of those very jets during an aerial battle that saw him tackling the Russian missile and drone assault. He didn't make it. In a statement released by the Ukrainian Army General Staff, it was revealed that Moonfish had enjoyed some early success against the Russian missiles, shooting down 4 of them using his F-16's airborne weapons. Following that success, Moonfish, who was one of the first Ukrainian pilots to qualify to fly an F-16, encountered difficulties. During the approach to the next target, contact with one of the aircraft was lost. As it turned out later, the plane crashed. The pilot died, read the statement. Ukraine has yet to confirm if Moonfish was shot down or whether it was issues related to pilot or mechanical errors that led to his F-16 crashing. Whatever the case may be, the sad fact for Ukraine is that it's lost both a good pilot and one of the 6 F-16s it's received in the initial delivery, leaving it with just 5 until the next batch comes along. It was a difficult incident for the country, though it came tinged with a minor success. Moonfish had managed to destroy 3 attack missiles and 1 attack drone before his plane crashed. When combined with the much greater success achieved when dealing with the Nightmare strike that came 2 days prior, it's clear Ukraine is starting to figure out how to use its F-16s to turn the tide of battle against Russia. All of which brings us to a key question. What have we learned so far? Speaking to the Ward Carroll YouTube channel, Professor Justin Bronk, a senior research fellow with the Royal United Services Institute, says that these early engagements show Ukraine is taking a cautious early approach with its F-16s. So far, we're not seeing a huge amount of what the Ukrainians are doing with the F-16, which in many ways is quite encouraging. It suggests they're being fairly cautious with them. It suggests that they're probably concentrating on working out and practicing the dispersed operation model, said Bronk. This early caution is smart on Ukraine's part, as it means it's tempering the elation of finally having F-16s with the reality that it only had 6 of them as of the creation of this video. So it's deploying them in a limited defensive manner. There are no confirmed uses of the F-16 near the front lines, which Bronk points out is a far more dangerous use. They're also not being used to support the Kursk invasion, meaning Ukraine is either still working on the best strategy for a more offensive deployment, or it's biding its time until more of the promised 85 F-16s arrive in the country. Of course, these early engagements aren't risk-free, as we saw with Moonfish, but Ukraine choosing not to use its F-16s on the front lines right now means it believes the jets are best used in isolated engagements, which brings us to their current air defense role. Task and Purpose points out that the F-16 Ukraine lost wasn't flying near Kursk, and it wasn't lost near the borders where active fighting is taking place on the ground. This shows that the early assessments of their usage are correct, with Ukraine preferring to use its F-16s in an air defense role, meaning they will likely play the part of interceptors for the foreseeable future. Interestingly, the same channel also points out a side benefit of this interception strategy. Noting that there are only so many interceptor missiles to go around in Ukraine, Task and Purpose says that F-16s can more easily take out missiles and drones thanks to their advanced sensors, which frees up a lot of the older platforms to tackle riskier missions near the front lines. It sounds counterintuitive, but there's also a logic to this approach. Ukraine's pilots are far more experienced in flying Soviet-era jets that make up the majority of its air force. They know how to get the most out of them, says Task and Purpose, meaning Ukraine can use them to offer close air support to ground troops and conduct harassment missions, while the F-16 patrols the skies over Ukraine, ready to intercept any incoming missiles and drones. This approach also enables some level of training. After all, Ukraine's current F-16 pilots have only undergone around 6 months of training for a platform that usually requires 18 to master. By taking the more cautious approach of using F-16s as missile interceptors, Ukraine's pilots can cut their teeth on less dangerous targets, according to Task and Purpose. Perhaps the strategy is to gain greater familiarity with the platform in the short term, which will enable Ukraine's pilots to use F-16s in riskier frontline missions once the country has received more of its promised stock. That future looks brighter too, thanks to the F-16 opening up a whole new arsenal of weapons for Ukraine to use. Task and Purpose note that having Western jets at its disposal means that Ukraine now has access to the advanced weaponry developed by NATO that it previously was only able to jerry-rig into its Soviet-era jets. The channel points out that Ukraine's jets were forced to use R-60 infrared missiles and R-27 semi-active missiles during the early stages of the war, as those were all that were available, as well as being the only types of missiles the jets could use. Both missiles were developed in the 1980s, making them around 40 years out of date, and they resulted in Ukrainian pilots not having long-range capabilities. Compare that with Russian pilots who are using R-77 active radar missiles, and you see why this is so important. The R-77 has fire-and-forget capabilities, meaning the pilot can pull the trigger on the missile and then move away as the missile tracks its target. Ukraine's missiles required its pilots to keep the noses of their planes pointed at their targets, meaning they couldn't pull away to evade fire. That's all changed with the arrival of the F-16. The jet is capable of firing the AIM-120 AMRAAM missile, which offers both fire-and-forget and beyond visual range capabilities, with many calling it one of the best active radar missiles in the world. It has a range of over 20 miles and can move at supersonic speeds before delivering a blast fragmentation warhead to a target. With missiles like these, Ukraine doesn't just achieve parity with the weapon systems used in Russian jets, it exceeds them. As more F-16s arrive in Ukraine, it's likely that we will see more of the jets making their way to the front lines to more directly engage Russian jets in the skies. That could change the entire complexion of the war, as F-16s could tackle the planes Russia is using to launch glide bombs and take out targets on the ground to enable advances by Ukrainian soldiers. However, that type of strategy is likely being reserved for the future, when Ukraine is more capable of unleashing the full potential of its F-16s. For now, it's going down a more defensive route, which brings us back to Ukraine's current usage of the F-16 as an interceptor. It's been making the jet even more capable of carrying out its role by implementing new defensive systems. Task and Purpose examined the F-16s that were on display during Zelensky's August 4th announcement of their arrival and noticed that they had new pieces of kit installed beyond their missile systems. An examination of the jet's pylons revealed that some of them looked bulkier than they should, with one even looking like it had small vents and a camera lens installed. That's the combination of pylon-integrated dispensing systems and electronic combat-integrated pylon systems, Task and Purpose said, adding that they are additional defensive models created to improve the F-16's survivability. With these systems, Ukraine's F-16s can use jammers capable of spoofing the radar signals enemy missiles produce, preventing them from locking onto their fighter jet while it's in the air. The systems are even powerful enough to confuse ground-based anti-air systems, as well as larger aircraft. Add an AAR-60 missile warning system to those pylons, which uses ultraviolet light to detect the exhaust plume an incoming missile produces, and you have extensive defensive capabilities. Those capabilities will prove essential as Ukraine continues to use F-16s in an interception capacity. They'll also prove vital should Ukraine ever send its F-16s into direct combat with Russian fighters on the front lines. By now we're getting a clearer picture of the Ukrainian strategy. It's using F-16s to intercept missiles and drones for now, all while preparing its pilots for a future in which it has more of those aerial platforms available, which may allow it to run more advanced operations closer to the front. Even if that future doesn't come to pass, the use of F-16s may free up Ukraine's Soviet-era aircraft to operate on the front lines in safe knowledge that the F-16s are protecting key Ukrainian military installations. And there's more. Returning to Justin Bronk's conversation with Wade Carroll, Bronk says that Ukraine has been attacking Russian air bases with large missile salvos already. By bringing F-16s into those strikes, Ukraine develops a greater chance for success, which will put more pressure on Russia to evacuate its air bases, relieving pressure on Ukraine in the process. Ukraine can potentially try and blend missile and HIMARS attacks to create this pressure, Bronk claims, which will result in Russia pulling more of its jets further back. Not only does this lower the risk of Russia sending glide bombs and its own jets into Ukraine, but it also creates space for Ukraine's F-16s to operate on the front lines with less risk of encountering Russian fighters. Even if Russia goes down the opposite path and creates layered defenses at its air bases near the front lines, Bronk claims, that will mean offering less defensive capacity to troops and installations that are actually on those front lines. Again, that would create opportunities for Ukraine's F-16s, allowing them to operate at lower risk as they'll face fewer defenses. This creates a win-win situation for Ukraine. Risk is lowered either because Russia is pulling back, which also helps Ukraine's ground troops, or it's lowered because Russia's front-line defenses are sent to its air bases, giving the F-16s more room to operate. Again, this is likely a strategy for the future. Ukraine will need to receive more than the number of F-16s promised to it to make this pressure tell. All of that brings us to the ultimate goal Ukraine wants to achieve with its F-16s, preventing Russia from gaining or retaining air superiority. As faltering as Russia's efforts to gain this superiority have been, given that it's lost 368 planes and 328 helicopters already, it's at least been able to rely on its aerial might from behind the front lines. Glide bombs are launched from bases Ukraine can't reach, for instance, allowing Russia to rain explosives down on Ukrainian targets with little recourse. Brock says the foreseeable future of Ukraine's F-16 strategy is not to gain air superiority, it's to prevent Russia from gaining air superiority. With Brock noting that even with its full fleet of F-16s, Ukraine will still be facing a Russia that has a fleet somewhere in the region of 350 genuinely modern and capable fast jets that are individually at a technical level significantly more capable than the F-16 in most metrics. So Ukraine's goal is to be capable of defending its skies rather than using its F-16s to operate with impunity over the front lines. That's an achievable goal that, if Ukraine realizes it, will relieve the pressure placed on its key military installations and troops on the ground. With his aerial options restricted, Putin will be forced to either waste more of his missiles and drones on strikes, cutting into his already dwindling supplies, or simply send more soldiers into a war that's already cost Russia over 630,000 military personnel. In the end, it's about imposing cost, argues Bronk. That's seen in the Kursk invasion and the long-range missile and drone strikes Ukraine has used against Russian energy facilities and its Black Sea fleet. Ukraine's new F-16s are likely going to become an extension of that strategy. They'll cost Russia valuable missiles, while helping Ukraine simply not lose the war long enough for its other strategies to really add up, to the point where Putin may have to pull out based on cost alone. Still, there's one thing that's being underestimated when it comes to Ukraine's use of the F-16: the impending arrival of the Saab 340 aircraft. In May 2024, Sweden announced that it would donate 2 of its Saab 340s to Ukraine, in a move that flew somewhat under the radar. With all the hubbub about Ukraine receiving F-16s, task and purpose suggests that the arrival of these planes could be a real force multiplier in terms of how Ukraine is able to leverage its F-16s. Why? Because it's a radar aircraft that's capable of spotting incoming threats before the F-16 systems can locate them. An F-16 without being backed up by this type of radar aircraft is like shooting a rifle without an ACOG or advanced combat optical gunsight scope, says the channel. The Saab 340 will serve as that scope. Though it's essentially a twin turboprop plane, the Saab 340 comes with a high-tech radar system and the ability to communicate the data it retrieves directly to an F-16 in the field. So the Saab 340 will track incoming missiles and similar threats at extremely far distances, allowing it to send tracking data to the F-16s so they can eliminate the threat. The arrival of the Saab 340 will reinforce Ukraine's use of the F-16 as an interceptor, making it far more effective than it currently is. And that, more than anything else, can make Ukraine's F-16 capable of turning the tide of the Ukraine war. With Saab 340s at their sides, Ukraine's F-16s become cruise and ballistic missile destroying machines, creating enormous costs for the Russian military while making their future missile strikes less effective. Perhaps that's why the Russian company Forez likely under advice from Putin, is offering a 15 million ruble reward to the first soldier who manages to shoot down an F-16. That bounty, which amounts to about $170,000, is a sure sign that Putin needs Ukraine's F-16s out of the sky so he can continue his special military operation in the way he envisions it. Of course, there are still challenges ahead for Ukraine. The 6 F-16s it's received so far, or rather 5 now that one crashed, are far from enough to allow Ukraine to establish air superiority. They also aren't enough for Ukraine to fully realize its defensive strategy, meaning Ukraine can't start sending its Soviet-era fighters to the front lines yet. There's also the training issue to confront. 6 months of training has made Ukraine's pilots capable, but they're not at the stage where they can get the most out of the F-16 systems yet. Flying defensive missions, which are relatively low risk compared to frontline sorties, can boost flight hours, but there's still a clear skill gap that needs to be filled. It's also worth pointing out that Ukraine doesn't have access to the most modern weapons the F-16 can use. The US and NATO may not want to risk the most advanced weapons providing an intelligence coup for potential adversaries, claims Task and Purpose, while pointing out that Russia may be able to reverse engineer anything that it captures from crashed F-16s. There's still plenty of good news for Ukraine to take away from its first use of the F-16. It knows the jets are capable of shooting cruise missiles out of the sky, and that its pilots are well trained enough to make use of the planes. More flight hours will only build on this training, opening up further options in the future upon the arrival of the Saab 340s and the rest of the promised F-16 stock. And if Ukraine can maintain as many of its F-16s as possible, it's going to be able to use them to chip away at Russia's aerial and missile forces, as well as potentially offer support to its ground troops to drag Russia even deeper into a war of attrition that's already cost Putin and his military heavily. The F-16s aren't going to turn the tide of the war alone, but Ukraine's clever usage of them so far suggests that they'll become a vital piece of the Ukraine war puzzle, that when combined with Ukraine's other cost-creating strategies, will put and keep Putin on his back foot until he's forced to negotiate. What do you think about the arrival of the F-16s in Ukraine? Has Ukraine used them effectively so far, and do you think it will change up or build on its current strategies once more of these multi-role fighters arrive? There's something strange about the F-16s that have been delivered to Ukraine. This strangeness is far from a disadvantage to Ukraine. They haven't received faulty F-16s that are going to struggle more than a standard F-16 when confronting Russian threats. Quite the opposite, in fact. Images of the F-16s Ukraine has received so far show a host of interesting changes to the standard version of the plane that could give it a marked advantage when facing off against Russian aerial and anti-air threats. So, what makes Ukraine's F-16s so different from a standard F-16? We'll be answering that question in this video. But before we do, let's take a look at the story so far when it comes to Ukraine's F-16s, as well as the standard specifications of the aerial platform, so we can truly appreciate what makes Ukraine's new multi-role fighters so special. Almost since the beginning of the Ukraine war, President Volodymyr Zelensky started calling on his Western allies to provide his country with F-16 multi-role fighter jets. There are plenty of reasons he felt Ukraine needed them, the most important of which being that the country's current crop of fighters simply wasn't fit for the task of taking on Russia. Why? All were Soviet-era platforms that had come from Russia during the days when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, with most falling well short of what Russia is capable of sending into the skies. Ukraine's stocks include 43 MiG-29s. While far from the worst aerial platform in the world, the MiG-29 was developed in the 1970s, along with the Su-27, of which Ukraine has 26. It ended service in 1983, almost a decade before the collapse of the Soviet Union, and was designed as a multi-role fighter capable of flying for almost 1,500 miles before needing to refuel. In addition to the MiG-29 and Su-27s, Ukraine had 12 Su-24s and 17 Su-25s, which are even older jets. You're likely already seeing a couple of problems with this fleet. Beyond the age of the flight platforms, which will give them limited survivability, especially if they had already logged a large number of flight hours, Ukraine's Soviet-era jets were made by Russia. That means Moscow would understand precisely what they were capable of, meaning it could create suitable countermeasures to make most of them almost a non-factor in the war. And that's what we've seen so far. Though Russia's attempts to establish aerial dominance have been faltering at best, with the country losing 368 planes so far, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Ukraine hasn't been able to counter that. It can't. Its platforms are too old and too familiar, meaning they've been relegated to serving an occasional defensive role against the Russian advance. Add to that the size difference between the country's air forces. Ukraine has around 72 fighter jets to Russia's 809, and you have a serious problem for Ukraine. It didn't have the quality of planes it needed, and frankly, couldn't compare to the numbers Russia could bring to bear. That's why Zelensky was so adamant that Ukraine needed the F-16s, which he viewed as being superior to almost anything Russia was fielding, as well as offering the versatility needed for Ukraine to establish pockets of aerial dominance. However, the US, which produces the F-16s, didn't want to send any. In February 2023, Slate published an article in which it explained the reasons why American President Joe Biden was so reluctant to send F-16s, or even approve the sending of these fighters by any other country. The first reason was practical. Ukraine simply wasn't ready to receive them. The F-16 is a complex aerial platform that differs enormously from the Soviet-era fighters Ukraine's pilots were using. This would not be a case of pilots simply jumping from one platform to another. Extensive training, taking at least 6 months, would be needed before Ukraine could even field any F-16s. Add to this the maintenance issues surrounding the F-16. Their complexity compared to old Soviet platforms means they require almost daily maintenance, with the multi-role fighters' systems being so delicate that they require pristine airfields to function. Ukraine has precious few of these airfields, the US argued, and those it does have could become targets for Russian bombs that would force constant repairs that kept the F-16s out of the sky. Finally, there was the red line issue. Biden was so hesitant to send F-16s to Ukraine because doing so could be a provocation that would push Putin into escalation. The crux of the issue seems to lie with the F-16's range. Being capable of striking a target from 500 miles away could mean that Ukraine would want to use the fighters to attack Russia on its own territory. Putin could consider the mere presence of F-16s in Ukraine as a threat to his country, which could provoke him into launching a wider war against the US or other NATO members. Zelensky presented counterpoints to these arguments. Several red lines have already been crossed, with Putin doing little more than echoing the hollow threats he'd been making since the beginning of the war. As for escalation, Zelensky could argue that Putin did that the moment he sent Russian troops into his country. What more did the West need to see? To Ukraine's president, providing F-16s would allow Ukraine to better fight against the Russians, thus reducing the possibility of an escalation. It took a long time, but Zelensky's arguments won out in the end. Serhiy Golubtsov, the chief of aviation of Ukraine's Air Force, had constantly argued that Ukraine needed to receive 4 operational squadrons of F-16s to take control of just a single sector of the 700-mile war front. After a year of intensive diplomacy, according to Forbes, those 4 squadrons would finally arrive. They wouldn't be provided by the US. Sending F-16s into Ukraine was considered too much of a provocation by the White House, but America had permitted its European allies to provide F-16s of their own. Enter Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands, which stepped up to collectively pledge 85 F-16s to Ukraine. Forbes says that this will be enough for Ukraine to sustain its training unit in Romania, which is now using 18 ex-Dutch F-16s to bring its pilots up to snuff, as well as provide 4 squadrons of the multi-role fighters, with each squadron being 16 F-16s strong. Granted, Ukraine wouldn't be receiving all of these F-16s at once. The first 6 arrived in August 2024. With further deliveries to be staggered throughout 2024 and 25. Still, Zelensky had his wish. Ukraine finally had access to F-16s, and with the first batch of Ukrainian pilots graduating from F-16 training programs just 3 months prior to the receipt of these first 6, Ukraine would finally be able to bolster its aerial threat. Footage of the first F-16s to arrive in Ukraine emerged in August 2024, with Zelensky proudly standing in front of his country's new jets to proclaim that we did it. And that first glimpse provided eagle-eyed experts with the chance to see that Ukraine's F-16s were far from standard. There was something different about them. A few things, in fact, with each difference being an improvement that would allow these Ukrainian F-16s to counter Russia in surprising ways. So what do we know about Ukraine's new F-16s? We'll start with the standard specifications. Surprisingly, the F-16 Fighting Falcon has a history that stretches back almost as far as the MiG-29s, which are considered outdated. The first variation of the F-16, the F-16A, debuted in January 1979, after a little over 2 years of development. This was followed by the F-16B, which featured tandem cockpits rather than the F-16A's single cockpit. And by November 1981, the US was already implementing a series of improvements that included built-in structural and wiring provisions, along with a new systems architecture. These improvements eventually led to the creation of the F-16C and F-16D, with practically all F-16A and F-16B having been converted to these improved versions since. The multi-role fighter is built by Lockheed Martin, with the jet being capable of producing 27,000 pounds of thrust. An F-16 is a little over 49 feet long, with a wingspan of almost 33 feet, and the jet has a maximum takeoff weight of 37,500 pounds when accounting for fuel and armaments. The jet can reach a top speed of 1,500 miles per hour, which is around twice the speed of sound and somewhat equivalent to the MiG-29. It also has a 50,000-foot ceiling with a range of 2,002 miles, which is around 500 miles more than Ukraine's previous best fighter jet. But where the F-16 truly stands out is in its weaponry. The jet can locate its targets in any type of weather and comes equipped with two types of powerful missiles, the AIM-9 Sidewinder and the AIM-120 AMRAAM. The Sidewinder is an air-to-air heat-seeking missile that can reach supersonic speeds and lock onto an opposing aircraft's engine to take it out with a high-explosive warhead. As for the AMRAAM, it's also an air-to-air missile, with its biggest advantage being that it can be fired from beyond visual range. A target won't even know it's coming until it's too late, thanks to the missile's 20-mile range and supersonic speeds. Combine all of this with an M61A1 20mm multi-barrel cannon, which comes with 500 rounds as standard, and you have a multi-role fighter that's still capable of tackling most aerial threats despite its age. But that's all par for the course for the F-16. Ukraine's F-16s have all these features, but they also come packed with several others that make them very different from the standard American versions. You could even say that Ukraine has received F-16s on steroids, which brings us to the next part of the video. Just what makes Ukraine's F-16s so strange? We start with the pylons. On August 26, 2024, the Millennium 7 History Tech YouTube channel noted that examinations of the F-16s in Ukraine revealed they used two types of pylons. The first is the Pylon Integrated Dispensing System Plus, or PIDS Plus, with the other being the Electronic Combat Integrated Pylon System, or ECIPS Plus. The former appears to be mounted on the port side of Ukraine's F-16s, with the latter on the starboard side. On their own, these pylons aren't especially unique. They both appear to be upgraded over the older PIDS and ECIPS systems, but they serve a similar role. Both PIDS Plus and ECIPS Plus are installations that provide Ukraine's F-16s with additional capacity, adding extra tanks for fuel as well as guided weapons and a host of systems that improve the aircraft's operation and survivability. Both are military standard 1760 NATO compliant, which is essential for allowing the utilities stored in them to interface with the F-16. In other words, a lack of compliance means that Ukraine's F-16s would be unable to fire weapons or use any of the defensive systems that can be installed into these pylons. Each of these pylons provides either a 28-volt DC connection or a 155 to 200-volt AC connection, allowing power to be supplied to the systems installed into the pylon. They also have both main and auxiliary power buses, with the latter being essential to keeping the pylon operational if an enemy attack takes out the main power bus. The pylons also feature a military standard 1553 data bus connection, which allows them to exchange data between the F-16's onboard computer and the computers that control the fighter's weapon systems. These pylons alone are not what make Ukraine's F-16s so special. Yes, they're upgrades over the standard PIDS and ECIPS pylons, but it's what's installed in those pylons that's so fascinating. The pods. Millennium 7 points out that the Ukrainian F-16 pylons look different than usual thanks to the presence of a strange pod that isn't included in the jet's standard specifications. This is a self-protection pod created by the Danish company Terma that offers Ukraine's F-16s some very interesting capabilities. Each of these pods can track radio frequency and infrared missile threats, essentially acting as an early warning system for the F-16's pilot. In addition to this tracking, the pods can automatically deploy some of the F-16's countermeasures, such as its infrared flares and chaff, which are designed to throw incoming fire off target. The flares serve as decoys for incoming missiles, providing an alternative target for the missile that protects the F-16 from being struck. Terma's pods include these flares at the front and rear, allowing them to be deployed regardless of where a threat may emerge. As for the chaff, that involves a release of masses of glass fibers coated in aluminium that are ejected from cartridges before spreading throughout the air to confuse an enemy's radar system. They're vital when attempting to fly past anti-air defensive systems such as Russia's S-300 and 400. Neither countermeasures is new to the F-16. What is new is the automation that the Terma-made pods provide. At their heart lies the AN/ALQ-213 Electronic Warfare Management System, which provides constant updates related to the health and status of the F-16s and automatically deploys the aircraft's countermeasures. Think of it as a management system that handles many of the F-16's defensive measures, allowing the pilot to focus on flying and striking the target. Best of all, the pods are small and lightweight. With a diameter of just 1 foot and being just 6.5 feet in length, they can easily be attached to the PIDS Plus and ECIPS Plus pylons without taking up room that could be used by other weapon systems and without adding unnecessary weight that could affect the craft's in-air survivability. In fact, a single pod weighs just 55 pounds, though this is without accounting for cabling and the countermeasure equipment loaded into the pod. Taken alone, these pods would already be useful additions to the F-16s. They're capable of detecting and diverting incoming threats, enabling safer passage to a target, However, there's something else that Millennium 7 spotted in its examination of Ukraine's F-16s. The ANAAR-60 missile warning system. Also loaded onto the pylons, the ANAAR-60 system features 6 sensors, according to Millennium 7, with each one having a 115-degree field of view. The channel notes that there appear to be 3 of these sensors installed on the PIDS Plus pylon of a Ukrainian F-16, with the other 3 on the ESIPS Plus. Collectively, these sensors provide a 360-degree warning system that operates in a full sphere rather than on a 2D plane. The sensors pick up on ultraviolet radiation at frequencies outside solar emissions, meaning they can't be confused by general sunlight and can thus operate in any weather conditions. Why does this matter? Approaching missiles generate an exhaust plume, which contains ultraviolet radiation. So the ANAAR-60 is able to detect that plume so it can notify both the F-16 pilot and the aircraft's systems of an incoming threat. As Millennium 7 points out, there's a trade-off with these UV detection systems. While they don't offer the same sort of range as infrared detection systems, they are more accurate, meaning they deliver fewer false positives and thus create a more realistic view of what's incoming in the F-16's airspace. The system's developer, the German company Hensoldt, offers more details. It notes that an estimated 500,000 shoulder-fired surface-to-air, or SAM, missiles exist in the world. Many aircraft losses are the result of these passive missiles, with the ANAAR-60 having been created to counteract the threat. The Block 2 variant of its ANAAR-60 system, which is the one that Millennium 7 speculates is present on the Ukrainian F-16s, is durable enough to last for more than 14,000 flight hours, which far exceeds the lifespan of the F-16 frame itself, and is capable of reporting up to 8 threats simultaneously and over 150 threats over the course of its lifespan. The ANAAR-60 requires no cooling, meaning it can operate constantly, and it weighs just 4.4 pounds, meaning its effect on the F-16's total weight is minuscule. Hensoldt also offers more details about the system's UV detection capabilities. It notes that the Block 2 variant of the system is optimized to detect the radiation signature in the UV solar blind spectral band, allowing it to not only detect incoming missiles, but indicate their direction at the maximum warning time available to the pilot. The sensors also use non-moving parts, which makes them mechanically sound and unlikely to be jarred by standard F-16 operations. That's a big plus for Ukraine. It means minimal maintenance is required. Being installed on the PIDS Plus and ESIPS Plus pylons also means that the ANAAR-60 is compatible with the other NATO-compliant systems, such as the pods we previously mentioned. So Ukraine's F-16s are more capable of detecting incoming threats than standard F-16s, and due to this compatibility between systems, it appears that Ukraine's F-16s can also use their ANAAR-60 systems to receive warnings about incoming missiles, with the pods automatically deploying countermeasures when needed. It all adds up to an impressive increase in the survivability of Ukraine's F-16s compared to the American standard versions of the aircraft, and there's even more. In addition to the ANAAR-60 system, Millennium 7 also identifies a radar jammer built into the Ukrainian F-16 pylons. This is the ANALQ-162 jammer, produced by Northrop Grumman and also known as the Shadow Box. Like the pods and ANAAR-60, the ANALQ-162 system is designed to be as compact as possible, again allowing it to be installed without weighing down the F-16 or getting in the way of the aircraft's weapon systems. Millennium 7 says the Shadow Box is made up of a pair of small antennas, which are built into a single black box and operated automatically via a simple console built into the system. It's typically used in helicopters, with its purpose being precisely what's described: jamming. The Military Analysis Network provides more details. It says that the Shadow Box is capable of automatically scanning for threat signals and will generate countermeasures as soon as those signals are found. These include the titular radar jamming, which protects the aircraft from SAM and airborne missiles that use continuous wave, or CW, radar as part of their guidance systems. That covers both the S-300 and S-400 anti-air defense systems Russia has installed around the front lines, meaning the Shadow Box can protect Ukraine's F-16s from several of the most prominent SAM threats Russia presents. Jamming is initiated as soon as the Shadow Box validates the CW signals it picks up. As for which jamming signals are sent out, that depends on those pre-programmed into the Shadow Box before the F-16 takes to the skies. So Ukraine can counter multiple types of CW radars, with the decisions likely being made on the ground based on what threats Ukraine believes its F-16s will face. A control panel is located inside the F-16's cockpit that allows the pilot to manually deploy the jamming signal, though the shadow box can also integrate with other defensive systems to allow for automatic jamming based on the threats those systems detect. It all adds up to create a triple threat of defensive systems that aren't available in standard F-16s. With these systems, Ukraine's F-16s are better able to track incoming threats, be they SAM or air-to-air missiles, and can deploy countermeasures ranging from infrared flares and chaff to radar jamming to prevent those missiles from hitting their target. The pilot gets a better view of the entire aerial field and can take on riskier operations, with mitigating systems designed to improve survivability when confronting some of the chief threats that Russia presents. It's an impressive package, truly lending credence to the opinion that Ukraine's F-16s are like standard F-16s only on steroids. But wait, there's more. Along with the addition of these non-standard systems to its F-16s, Ukraine is also collaborating with the United States to bolster the electronic warfare capabilities of its fighter jets. This is according to the Warzone, or TWZ, which published a report on August 26th claiming that Ukraine will start passing data generated by its F-16s to the US, with the latter then using that data to refine and improve the electronic warfare capabilities of both countries. TWZ said that the US is working alongside Norway and Denmark, both part of the consortium that provided F-16s to Ukraine, to pass through this data and enable reprogramming of the F-16 systems. Interestingly, the 68th Electronic Warfare Squadron, or EWS, which will be working on the project, says that the electronic capabilities being worked on aren't currently available in the US, so it appears that Ukraine and the US have a "we'll scratch your back if you scratch ours" relationship going. The data generated by Ukraine's F-16s will be useful to the US in developing this electronic warfare system, with Ukraine then benefiting from whatever the Americans come up with. It appears that whatever these electronic warfare concepts might be, they're going to be tied into the new systems installed in Ukraine's F-16s. The US Air Force says, relying on data provided by Denmark and Norway, then adapting new processes and approaches to the usual process, the team, referring to the 68th EWS, was able to understand the system and start their work. If that comment sounds vague to you, it's because the US doesn't want to reveal whatever it's cooking up, likely to prevent Russia from deploying any countermeasures until the new electronic warfare systems are deployed. What is known is that the collaboration is far from the 68th EWS's standard operating procedures. That was revealed by the squadron's director. The fact that the team was able to figure out the system in 2 weeks and go in-country with a partner to develop a best-ever mission data file is unheard of, and is thanks to the talent here in the squadron and in the wing, the director claims. That claim only raises more questions about precisely what type of systems the US and Ukraine are developing for Ukraine's F-16s. TWZ has some potential answers. It points out that an electronic warfare system needs to be capable of detecting, categorizing, and responding to waveforms if it's to work correctly. To do that, it must pull from data built into the system's threat library. To counteract this, TWZ says, operators using the sort of systems that electronic warfare attacks are supposed to counter have adopted systems of switching between operating modes and frequency bands, so those systems can't get a real read on what they're doing. On top of that, an electronic warfare system needs to be constantly updated as new threats emerge, with their databanks evolving periodically. That's where this collaboration may come into play. Ukraine's F-16s are gathering data that allows for the updating of America's threat libraries. But TWZ claims the US military has also been working on ways to automate and accelerate various parts of the reprogramming processes electronic warfare systems undergo. That automation would allow for the pushing out of upgrades far faster, with TWZ speculating that a good system might even be able to upgrade the systems of an aircraft that's already in flight. That is the holy grail, according to TWZ, an aircraft with an electronic warfare suite that can update in real time based on the data it's collecting about the enemy's systems. Why would that matter? Retired US Air Force Colonel Craig Arndl provided an anecdotal example in 2023 when speaking to Air Force Times. He brought up the idea of an American F-35 that encounters an SA-20, which is the NATO name for Russia's S-300 anti-air system, to explain the limitations in current electronic warfare suites. We're looking at an SA-20. I know it's an SA-20, Intel says there's an SA-20 there, but now my jet doesn't ID it as such because that SA-20 is operating potentially in a war reserve mode that we haven't seen before. The result is a jet that's unable to use its electronic warfare suite to counteract the threat the SA-20 presents at the time. However, the F-35 can flag the object for troops on the ground, the colonel says, who can update and reload the data into the jet so it's capable of understanding what it's looking at and how to geolocate the threat. That would be close to the Holy Grail TWZ describes, with the only possible improvement being the elimination of the manual updating and re-uploading process so that the F-35 systems can adapt to the SA-20 in real time. Could that be what Ukraine and the US, along with Denmark and Norway, are working on for the Ukrainian F-16s? Right now it's too early to tell. What we can say for certain is that Ukraine's F-16s are strange in the sense that they incorporate a variety of defensive systems that aren't seen in standard F-16s. The combination of those systems already improves the aircraft's survivability, but if work is in progress to create the holy grail of electronic warfare systems at the same time, and that work is progressing as quickly as the US Air Force seems to believe, it's possible that Ukraine's F-16s may end up on something more than steroids. They'll be loaded with systems that can identify threats in real time, adapt to them, and deliver invaluable data to other F-16s and Ukrainian forces on the ground. We're left with one final question. What does all of this mean for the Ukraine war? As powerful as these new defensive systems are, they don't make Ukraine's F-16s invulnerable. We've seen that already as Ukraine lost one of its F-16s on August 29th, with the only information we have on that loss being the F-16 was chasing a cruise missile when it went down. We still don't know if the crash was due to an enemy action, pilot error, or mechanical blip. Still, though Ukraine's F-16s are far from invulnerable, the addition of these new systems means the jets now have new ways to counter S-300, S-400, and R-77 missiles, among others, meaning they have become more versatile than any F-16 that's come before. So the F-16 isn't going to be the silver bullet that leads to Ukraine winning the war. Anybody who thinks that's the case hasn't been paying attention to Ukraine's claims that it needs F-16s to create small pockets of aerial domination across the front lines. However, with these new upgrades, Ukraine has F-16s that pack the same offensive punch as always, while being more capable of defending themselves against the weapons Russia is most commonly using to deal with aerial threats. And if the holy grail of electronic warfare systems can be added into the mix, we may see Ukraine's souped-up F-16s making massive dents into Putin's war efforts once more of them arrive. But what do you think about the strange F-16s Ukraine has received from its European allies? Are their defensive countermeasures enough to protect them from Russia's anti-air defenses? Or is it a case of adding a few shiny baubles to an aerial platform that's already showing its age? Let's be clear, Ukraine would not exist as a country today without US support. Mark Rutte made this statement during his first press conference as incoming NATO Secretary General on October 1, 2024, and the former Dutch Prime Minister certainly has a point. Since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the US has provided at least $80 billion in military and other aid to Ukraine, with the latest package worth $8 billion announced during Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's trip to New York in late September 2024. This aid, including everything from ammunition to M1 Abrams tanks and advanced missile systems like HIMARS and ATACMS, has not only undoubtedly enabled Ukraine to mount a stubborn, effective resistance, but to strike back. Of course, the US is far from the only nation to have provided sovereignty-preserving military aid to Ukraine, and it's one of NATO's smaller members, the Netherlands, that has just delivered arguably one of the most devastating blows to the Russian war effort to date. Russian President Vladimir Putin is not impressed, to say the least. So what exactly has the Netherlands done? Why could this mark a turning point in the war, and why is Putin so upset? All will be revealed in the video, but first, why is the Netherlands such a staunch supporter of Ukraine and an equally staunch opponent of Russia? This certainly wasn't always the case. As recently as 2016, Dutch citizens voted in a referendum against ratifying the EU's association agreement with Ukraine. However, research has shown that this against vote had very little to do with the feelings of the Dutch towards Ukraine itself. Some were concerned about a possible influx of cheap Ukrainian workers disrupting the local labor market, but their concerns were much more a reflection of dissatisfaction with the Dutch government at the time, led for 11 years until 2024 by the aforementioned Rutte. Dissatisfaction with what they perceived as increasing overreach by Brussels and resistance to European integration and EU expansion in general were also key factors in the vote. Many, particularly from the extreme right and left parties, were also concerned about provoking Putin, who had objected strongly to the idea of Ukraine joining the EU since the idea was first floated. Russia's invasion of Ukraine certainly shook things up in terms of Dutch sentiment toward both Ukraine and Putin. In research published by Bruegel in July 2023, 53% of Dutch citizens supported sanctions against Russia, even if this meant a higher cost of living for themselves. Only around a third felt that the most important thing was to reach a peace deal as quickly as possible, even if that meant Ukraine having to surrender some or all of the territories annexed by Russia in the Donbass, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Crimea. And in a January 2024 survey by Dutch newspaper RTL News, although 62% of those surveyed expressed worry that Russia might attack the Netherlands, their main concern seemed to be getting prepared, not backing down from Ukrainian support to appease Putin. Is this a case of Dutch courage? After all, Russia dwarfs the Netherlands in terms of size, spending power, population, and military strength, and on May 28, 2024, Putin directly threatened the Netherlands and other smaller European nations like the Baltic states over their provision of increasingly lethal military aid to Ukraine. In Europe, especially in small countries, they should realize what they're playing with. They should remember that they are countries with small, densely populated territories, he said. And he's not the only Russian politician to issue threats. On June 5, 2024, Alexei Zhuravlyov, a member of the State Duma, Russia's lowest house of parliament, directly threatened the Netherlands on primetime Russian TV. If NATO threatens our country, then we will target countries that provide NATO with the infrastructure. The Netherlands, where the NATO facilities are located, will be among the primary targets, he said, adding, "This is called a nice target in the military, and this is a matter of one day with minimal consumption of nuclear ammunition." It's fair to say that to date all such Russian threats have been more or less bluster. However, were Russia to follow through on them, it wouldn't be the first time Russian forces attacked the Netherlands. Back in 1799, during the War of the Second Coalition, an expeditionary force of British and Russian troops invaded the North Holland Peninsula in the Batavian Republic. In some respects, this invasion, which ended with Anglo-Russian withdrawal, shares some striking similarities to Russia's invasion of Ukraine today. Although the Russian forces were more or less hired by the British, their organization, discipline, and performance in the field left somewhat to be desired, contributing to the eventual retreat of the British. The British were actually led at the time by the exiled Dutch Prince William of Orange, who was expecting the Dutch to welcome his invasion with open arms. Instead, to his dismay, he encountered stiff resistance and innovative tactics, such as flooding the canals, which forced the Anglo-Russian forces to retreat. Putin made exactly the same mistake in the early days of the current war. The Russians advanced on Kyiv expecting the local population to be standing by the side of the highway waving Russian flags, as when Hitler rolled into Vienna 75 years earlier. Instead, he was welcomed with dogged resistance and innovative urban warfare, forcing his 40-mile-long convoy of armored vehicles to turn tail from outside Kyiv and head hastily back to the Donbass. However, besides this incident, known as the Anglo-Russian invasion of Holland, Russian-Dutch relations had for the most part been excellent, from Tsar Peter the Great's initial visits to the Netherlands in the 17th century until the onset of the Soviet Union. In fact, Dutch shipbuilders, brought back to Russia by Peter, more or less built the early Russian navy, and in the early 1800s, the Russians and Dutch fought together in the alliance against Napoleon. In more recent times, although Russian-Dutch relations have soured considerably over the past decade, they had been pretty healthy after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990. In 2011, Russian President Dmitry Medvedev met with Prime Minister Rutte in the Kremlin to discuss bilateral ties. Dutchmen Guus Hiddink and Dick Advocaat managed the Russian football team from 2006 to 12, and at the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia, Putin and Dutch King Willem Alexander clinked glasses and enjoyed a round of fine Dutch ale at the Holland Heineken beer house. In fact, 2013 was designated the Year of Russia in the Netherlands. It was supposed to be a celebration of 400 years of bilateral relations, and Putin actually visited Amsterdam on a state visit. But by the end of the year, relations had taken a significant turn for the worse. The trouble started when Russia arrested Greenpeace protesters aboard a Dutch-registered vessel in the Arctic, leading to a diplomatic spat. The arrest of Russian Embassy Minister Councillor Dmitry Borodin on charges of abusing his children followed a week later by Dutch diplomat Onno Elderenbosch being physically attacked in his apartment in Moscow, only worsened the mood. The spat upgraded from a diplomatic row to an economic one in March 2014, when the Netherlands participated in EU sanctions against Russia for its role in the civil war in Ukraine. Russia retaliated in August of that year with agricultural sanctions against the EU, including the Netherlands, who produce almost a quarter of the world's agricultural output. But it was the downing of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 over the Donbass in July 2014 that caused relations to reach their lowest point in centuries. A total of 193 Dutch nationals lost their lives on that plane. The Dutch blamed Russia, a claim that Russia has vehemently denied. But in any event, the net result was that by the time the Russian invasion of February 22 rolled around, and the Western world began imposing sanctions on Russia and supplying aid to Ukraine, it was a safe bet that the Netherlands would be one of the first to join in. And just as safe a bet that the Netherlands would be one of the first names on Russia's list of unfriendly nations too. In terms of support for Ukraine, the Dutch have certainly put their money where their mouth is, over $7.25 billion already, with another $4 billion committed until the end of 2026. So what kind of support has the Netherlands provided, and why is the latest round so important? We'll answer that second, juicy part of the question shortly. But first, let's unpack the aid that the Dutch have provided already, going from the least lethal to the most. The biggest, most powerful weapons deservedly get the headlines, but there's much more to waging war than that. And in the case of the Netherlands, it's really quite staggering to see just how comprehensive their assistance has been. As of June 5, 2024, the Netherlands has officially supplied a veritable mountain of clothing, helmets, shrapnel vests, rations and medical supplies, including personal first aid kits and medicines. Over 10,000 tents, 4,400 computer and data systems, 33 field hospitals, and 31 mobile field kitchens have also been supplied. To assist with logistics and engineering, they provided 25 cranes, 21 trucks with side loadings, 20 mechanical shovels, 29 forklift side loader combinations, 6 flat track cranes, 22 trailers, and 6,600 field reinforcements. With so much of the front line spanning rivers, estuaries, and wetlands, both the Ukrainians and Russians have regularly targeted bridges to disrupt enemy logistics. So the 37 Bailey bridges, 6 M3 pontoon systems, and 5 Leopard 1 bridge-laying tanks, with bridges supplied by the Netherlands, have undoubtedly come in extremely handy for the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or AFU. So of the assortment of 1,320 vehicles comprising 4-ton trucks, tractor-trailer combinations, Amarak vehicles, ambulances, fuel transport trucks, MB all-terrain vehicles, motorcycles and quads, state-of-the-art demining equipment has also been generously provided, including 1 Scamjack mine clearance rig, 3 Bozina mine clearance rigs, 9 mine plows, 6 mine rollers for BMP infantry combat vehicles, 2 Alkmaar-class naval mine hunters, plus a variety of mine detectors, mine picks, and EOD equipment. In terms of sensors and sensing devices, 557 assorted drones, 4 Vera-NG passive radar systems, plus ground sensors and night vision equipment, including brightness intensifiers and thermal imagers, have been delivered to the AFU. Moving on to firepower, individual weapons provided include MAG, Mini-Me, and 50 caliber machine guns, long and medium-range rifles such as the HK-416, and pistols. For fire support, 8 PZH-2000 armored howitzers, and an undisclosed quantity of M109 howitzers and 120mm mortars have been supplied. Needless to say, weapons are much more effective when they're loaded with ammunition. Copious amounts have been provided, including various types of small caliber ammunition for individual weapons, heavy ammunition for combat vehicles, tank and helicopter gun systems, anti-tank ammunition such as Law and Panzerfaust, 155mm artillery ammunition, plus rifle grenades, non-lethal hand grenades, and other explosives. Speaking of combat vehicles and tanks, these deliveries have been among the most high-profile, telling, and infuriating for Putin. He probably wasn't too concerned about the arrival of the Fennec reconnaissance vehicles and Viking tracked vehicles, but no doubt the arrival of 60 T-72 tanks and more recently 269 YPR armored tracked vehicles pleased him less. However, the cherry on top was surely the arrival of at least 100 Leopard 1 and 14 Leopard 2A4 tanks, jointly supplied by Germany and Denmark. These vehicles and tanks have undoubtedly made a difference on the battlefield, allowing the AFU to wage a protracted land-based war of attrition against a larger force for far longer than Putin was expecting. But it's in the air that the Dutch military support for Ukraine has had the most profound effect, going a long way to neutralize Russia's superiority in that theater of the war. In terms of air defense, the Dutch have supplied 2 Patriot launchers along with Patriot air defense missiles, 100 MR2 mobile anti-aircraft guns, 20 Bofors 40L70 40mm anti-aircraft guns, 4 Vera-NG systems, and assorted missiles and missile systems for air defense and drone control such as the Stinger. Under the category of air offense, we arrive at the most important, controversial, and possibly game-changing military aid yet: 42 F-16 fighter aircraft. F-16s can fly up to twice the speed of sound and have a maximum range of more than 2,000 miles. They can also fire modern weapons used by NATO countries, a critical point, as we'll see shortly. Of the 42 F-16s supplied by the Netherlands, 24 are destined for Ukraine for military use, with the remaining 18 going to Romania, where they'll be used to train Ukrainian pilots. On September 28, 2024, footage of 4 F-16 fighters leaving the Netherlands bound for Ukraine started appearing online. Although it's unknown exactly how many of the F-16s promised to Ukraine by the Dutch have already been delivered, these latest additions join at least another 6 that are known to have been delivered in early August 2024. Although Zelensky has stated that he needs at least 300 F-16s to mount a truly effective air defense and offense against Russia, these latest deliveries are undoubtedly a major boost for Ukraine. With a bit of luck, they'll last a bit longer than the first confirmed loss, which crashed on August 26, 2024. The reasons for the crash are still unclear, with a Defense Ministry inquiry underway. A heavy Russian aerial attack involving 5 missiles and 74 Shahid drones was underway at the time of the crash, according to the Ukrainian Air Force. But there were also reports that it was shot down by friendly fire from a Patriot missile. On September 26, 2024, Russian military channels reported that a Russian hypersonic Kinzhal missile strike had destroyed 4 F-16s on the ground at Strakon-Stantinov airfield in western Ukraine. The Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation immediately denied it. Russian sources, including propagandist Anatoly Shary, are spreading information about the supposed loss of 4 F-16 fighter jets during today's unexpected missile strike. This information is presented without any evidence or concrete facts. Such reports are yet another fake designed to manipulate public opinion, fabricated to push the narrative of the ineffectiveness of Western aircraft, their statement on Telegram read, without providing any evidence or concrete facts themselves. Such is the fog of war. But assuming that Ukraine still has the full quota of either 9 or 23 F-16s at its disposal, how can these few planes make a difference in the war? They're 45 years old after all, and in truth have been decommissioned and mothballed by the Dutch, who are in the process of upgrading to the state-of-the-art F-35. The answer in a nutshell: long-range strikes deep inside Russia. Ukraine's strikes inside Russia are becoming much more frequent, much more destructive, and are already a serious thorn in Putin's side. The Russian Defense Ministry issues daily reports of the shooting down of dozens, if not hundreds, of Ukrainian drones and missiles inside Russia, particularly in and around the city of Belgorod. But increasing numbers are getting through, and the damage and casualties are rising. Since the beginning of September 2024, there have been 6 major incidents. On September 1st, Ukraine launched over 100 drones against targets including the Konakovo power station in Konakovo, Tver Oblast, and the Moscow refinery in Moscow. Then on September 10th, Ukraine launched 144 drones against Moscow, the largest drone attack against Russia in the war. Russian authorities reported dozens of homes being damaged and 2 people killed by the attack. But the Ukrainians were just getting started. On September 18th, Ukraine launched a successful drone attack on the main Missile and Artillery Directorate, or GRAU, 107th Ammunition Depot in Toropets, causing a massive series of explosions and fires while damaging much of the town. NASA firm's satellites detected the resulting fires over an area of approximately 5 square miles, with the blast wave spread up to 200 miles. Russian officials reported that 13 people had been injured and that an evacuation of the area had been ordered, with the Estonian Defense Forces Intelligence Center estimating that the strike had caused 30,000 tons of munitions to explode. Then on the night of September 20th to 21st, 2024, Ukraine launched drone attacks on 2 Russian ammunition depots, the Grau 23rd Arsenal near the village of Oktyabarsky in Tver Oblast and the 719th Artillery Ammunition Base near Tioretsk in Krasnodar Krai. Although fires and some damage were reported, the Russians claim the drones were all shot down and the damages and fires were caused by falling debris. Whether that's true or not, for the Russians, October certainly started with a bang. October 3rd particularly. In the early hours, Ukrainian drones struck the Borysoglebsk air base in the Voronezh Oblast, about 185 miles from Ukraine's Kharkiv Oblast, targeting Su-34s and Su-35 jets, fuel tanks, and a warehouse for Russian glide bombs. While the extent of the damage is not yet clear, the NASA firm's satellite monitoring system detected several fire hotspots on the premises of the facility, supporting claims of a successful attack. Then, during the day, Russian sources reported the downing of 4 Ukrainian missiles attempting to attack the Kursk nuclear power plant, or NPP. The missiles were reportedly shot down just 3 miles from the NPP itself, causing a fire in the town of Kurchatov. This is not the first time the Russians have narrowly avoided direct Ukrainian hits on the Kursk NPP, and frankly, one has to question the sanity of attacking a nuclear power plant so close to Ukraine's borders. As Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova pointed out in late September, radiation doesn't stop at borders. Radiation doesn't need a visa. Or maybe the Ukrainians have forgotten what happened at Chernobyl. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant, just 60 miles from Kyiv, was Ukraine's first NPP, but is no longer operational. Ukraine still has 3 fully operational NPPs, however, with 15 nuclear reactors between them. They are the 3 gigawatt or GW South Ukraine nuclear power plant located in Yuzhno-Krainsk, the 3 GW Rivne nuclear power plant in Rivne, and the 2 GW Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant in Netishin. Technically, the 6GW Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, located in Energodar, is the fourth Ukrainian MPP, but it's been under Russian control since 2022 and regularly shelled by Ukraine too, if the Russians and staff are to be believed. These MPPs are critical for Ukraine's energy supply, particularly since Russia has been mercilessly hammering Ukraine's thermal power infrastructure for almost 2 years, starting as retaliation for Ukraine's successful attack on the Kerch Bridge in Crimea. These attacks, according to the Ukrainian authorities, have decimated 80% of Ukraine's power supply, leaving millions of people at risk of severe power cuts this coming winter. But so far, Russia has strictly avoided targeting the MPPs. Why would Ukraine risk provoking Russia into striking their MPPs by repeatedly trying to strike theirs? For sure, up until now, Putin has seemingly allowed Ukraine to step over one supposed red line after another, without any of the nuclear or other highly destructive retaliation he keeps threatening. But there's a very big difference between striking a nuclear reactor and striking an ammo depot or an airfield. However costly the damage inflicted on the targets Ukraine has been hitting might be, it doesn't have a half-life of thousands of highly radioactive years. Perhaps this is why, besides the Netherlands and Denmark, none of the nations that are supplying military aid to Ukraine have given permission to use their weapons to strike deep into Russia, yet. Maybe they simply don't trust Ukraine not to do something that might have devastating consequences for themselves. In late September, Putin responded to growing provocation and subsequent ridicule about his failure to follow through with major escalation in response to each red line being nonchalantly stepped over by Ukraine. He ordered Russia's nuclear doctrine to be updated. In a nutshell, the update means that if Russia is attacked, even with missiles that contain conventional weapons but are able to contain nuclear warheads, Russia could respond with a nuclear attack. And not just against the country firing the missile, but against the countries that supplied and facilitated it too. Perhaps he's bluffing again, or perhaps it's just a matter of time until the red haze comes over him and he reaches for the big red button. Certainly, subsequent public statements from the US and the UK expressing hesitation about allowing Ukraine to strike deeper within Russia using its weapons suggest that, at least publicly, they've taken him seriously. Or perhaps the reticence to give permission is more a question of domestic politics. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been adamant about not allowing the use of Taurus missiles supplied to Ukraine for strikes inside Russia. His party, the Social Democratic Party or SPD, is losing ground rapidly to both the right-wing Alternative for Germany, locally known as the AfD, and left-wing Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance, Reason and Justice, both of whom strongly oppose further military aid to Ukraine. He doesn't want to risk pushing more voters into their hands. French politics is a bit of a circus at the moment, to put it mildly. A wide coalition of left and extreme left-leaning parties colluded in the second round of general elections to keep out the far right, who had won the first round. President Emmanuel Macron now seems to have colluded with the right, but not the far right, to diminish the power of the victorious left in the new cabinet. The left is furious, as are the far right. It's a political powder keg, which could easily be ignited as a result of France being dragged into direct involvement in Ukraine, or worse, subject to attack by Russia. According to the Russians, fragments of the downed missiles in the October 3rd attack on the Kursk MPP indicate they were French-supplied scalps. And scalp missiles are capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. France has 58 nuclear reactors at 18 sites, almost all of which are within the 1,865-mile range of the Kh-47M2 Kinzhal. The UK's political situation is only marginally more stable than that in France. Sir Keir Starmer, their fourth prime minister in as many years, is grappling with right-wing anti-immigration riots, discord within his own party over military support for Israel, and increasing discontent over the ever-rising cost of living. Both he and his Defense Secretary David Lammy have spoken aggressively in favor of Ukraine, with Lammy likening Putin to a slave owner trying to turn a mafia state into a mafia empire, in a fiery speech at the UN on September 25, 2024. But besides the French scalps, the British Storm Shadows are the only other missile provided to Ukraine so far that's capable of holding a nuclear warhead. The Storm Shadow is a precision-guided, air-launched cruise missile with a range of over 185 miles, costing around $1 million a pop. It uses INS, GPS, and terrain reference navigation, making it capable of attacking hardened or buried targets. And Ukraine has been using Storm Shadows prodigiously to attack Russian targets since deliveries started arriving in 2023. In particular, Storm Shadows have been used to target Russian naval assets such as the Rostov-on-Don submarine and Minsk landing ship in Sevastopol. With the recent polarizing US election, the last thing the US needs is a major escalation of the war its ally is already embroiled in. They already have Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's belligerence to deal with. And hot wars and elections are generally not a good mix at the best of times, unless you're Putin if the most recent Russian election results are anything to go by. Republican President-elect Donald Trump has made it clear that his approach to the Ukraine war will not be the same as the kind of support that the Biden administration has delivered. With Kamala Harris out of the picture, Israel can certainly count on Trump's support, but what the US does in regards to Ukraine remains to be seen. Compared to all of the above, the political situation in both the Netherlands and Denmark is decidedly sane and stable. Perhaps that's part of the reason these nations have been the first to unequivocally grant permission to Ukraine to use their weapons to strike as deep inside Russia as Ukraine deems necessary. The Danes had already granted permission for Ukraine to use the 19 F-16s they are supplying for strikes inside Russia back in May. In August, Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen went even further. Defending yourself may well include invading the aggressor's territory. If, as part of this, you attack the infrastructure or military facilities of the attacking party, this is fully in line with the rules of war, he said. And on September 24, 2024, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen urged others to follow their example. Let's end the discussion about red lines. Let's not delay what Ukrainians need to push Russia back. So far, only the Dutch have heeded the call and joined the Danes in supplying their F-16s. That gives Ukraine the capability to fire long-range missiles deep into Russia. As mentioned earlier, the F-16 supplied to Ukraine have been outfitted with the ability to fire modern, long-range, high-impact weapons. Ukraine now has the F-16s, but they'll still need the missiles. To that end, on top of all the other assistance detailed earlier in the video, on July 10, 2024, the Netherlands announced that it had allocated an additional 300 million euros, around $325 million, to purchase munitions for the F-16. As ground-based missiles, neither the ATACMS nor HIMARS missiles supplied in large quantities by the US can be fired from an F-16. So what long-range munitions capable of striking deep into Russia could those funds procure? The lowest hanging fruit in terms of availability and suitability would be the US-made AIM-120 family, which can carry a 44-pound warhead. The variant with the longest range is the AIM-120D, but at 86 to 97 miles, it's barely going to reach Kursk, let alone deep into Russia. While these missiles might well prove invaluable for use in defensive situations, shooting down Russian missiles and drones from way behind the front lines, in an offensive sense, they're a waste of money. Russia's reaction to Ukraine's successful drone attacks in the Russian oblasts bordering Ukraine has been to move attack aircraft and other expensive assets further back into the heartland, beyond the range of Storm Shadows, Scalps, and attack drones. What Ukraine really needs is a warehouse full of AGM-158 JASSMs. These air-launched US-made cruise missiles pack a 1,000-pound warhead that can be fired with an accuracy of within 10 feet. More importantly, their range is from 230 to 575 miles, depending on the model, and Moscow is only 280 miles from the border. At around $1 million each, that Dutch F-16 ammunition fund could procure the necessary warehouse full, provided that is, that the US is willing and able to part with them. Only somewhere between 2,000 and 7,200 units have ever been produced, with Lockheed Martin, the manufacturer, only able to produce 500 to 1,000 units annually. Thus far, the US has been unwilling to include JASSMs in any military aid package. To be fair, before the confirmed delivery of the Dutch and Danish F-16s, it made little sense. That's because their incompatibility with what remains of the Ukrainian Air Force's ex-Soviet jets means there will be nothing to fire them from. Now, those JASSMs could turn out to be the game changer, and with the US distracted by controversies surrounding the recent election, chaos in the Middle East, his Kursk invasion having stalled, and the Eastern Front collapsing, Zelensky and the AFU could certainly use a game changer about now. But whatever happens next, history suggests the Netherlands will always be in Ukraine's corner. Do you think the US will give Ukraine JASSMs? If they do, what targets do you think would cause the most damage to Russia? How do you stop a swarm of kamikaze drones flying straight at you? That's the challenge Ukraine has faced since Russia started using Iranian-made Shahid 136 drones in 2022. These drones are fast, hard to spot, and carry enough explosives to wipe out buildings, planes, and people in one hit. Ukraine has tried advanced systems like Iris-T and Patriot, but Russia's swarm tactic, sending dozens of drones at once, makes it almost impossible to stop every single one. But now that's about to change. Ukraine is getting its hands on a German weapon that's about to shut down Russia's drone strikes for good. Enter the Gepard. In this video, we'll break down why this older anti-aircraft system is exactly what Ukraine needs right now, how they plan to use it, and the challenges they might face. But first, a question. Just how many Gepards has Ukraine received? On June 5, 2024, the Ukrainian Air Force published the first photos of the Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft systems procured for Ukraine by the United States from Jordan in Ukrainian Air Force hands. Each of these guns have been equipped with modern radar and fire control systems, and at least 60 of them are believed to be on their way. America paid $118 million to Jordan for these weapons, just under $2 million per gun, with the money coming from America's Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. The upgrades to the guns, still to be delivered, will be carried out in Jordan before they're shipped to Ukraine. But those aren't the only Gepards in Ukraine. In September 2024, the Kyiv Independent reported on a German military aid package that included a trio of Gepards, along with the spare parts Ukraine would need to maintain them. While not as large a package as that promised by the US, every little bit helps for Ukraine doggedly fighting back against the swarms of kamikaze drones that Russia is capable of unleashing thanks to its ties to Iran. Germany has also played a key role in training Ukrainian soldiers to use the Gepard. Army Recognition reports that a team of Ukrainian soldiers traveled to Germany to take part in an intensive 2-month training program designed to hone their ability to use the Gepard and develop algorithms for various operational situations. Those algorithms likely focused on Russia's drone-based threat, though it's equally likely that the Ukrainian trainees also learned how to use the Gepard to take out incoming cruise missiles. Either way, the training paid off. Toward the end of the 2-month program, the Ukrainian team took part in an exercise simulating the training and destruction of a training aircraft, which was itself simulating an incoming cruise missile. Using the Gepard, the Ukrainian crew was able to detect and destroy the threat, showcasing its proficiency at using the Gepard to neutralize Russian aerial assets. Those skills were put to the test for real on June 2, 2024, when that very same team used Gepard guns to shoot down 6 Shahid kamikaze drones and 18 Russian X-101, X-555, and Caliber cruise missiles during an attack on critical Ukrainian infrastructure. Not only has Ukraine received these valuable weapons, but its troops are being trained to utilize them to maximum effect and are starting to put the training to work. But what exactly is the Gepard in the first place? The Gepard is a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun that dates back to Cold War-era Germany. The weapon spent 8 years in development, with engineering crews honing its capabilities between 1965 and 1973, before it was officially introduced into military service in 1976. The weapon was made in Germany, with several major contractors, including Rheinmetall, AEG Telefunken, and Krauss Maffei, combining to produce the first batch of 570 Gepards, along with 19 production vehicles, which were earlier prototypes. The gun was originally developed to confront the Soviet frontal aviation threat of the late 60s and early 70s, with a particular focus on the dangerous Mi-24 Hind attack helicopter. It sits on a lengthened Leopard 1 tank chassis, but has less armor than the Leopard 1, probably to improve portability. Each Gepard has space for a driver at the front, with the 2-man gun turret mounted in the middle. The turret is somewhat unusual when it comes to anti-air defense systems. Rather than rounds being fired from the main turret, they're fired from a pair of 35mm autocannons that are mounted on the sides of the turret. Add a search radar mounted on the top of the turret, along with a tracking radar at its front, and you get a gun that's capable of firing 2 streams of 35mm Fury in a 180-degree arc. Speaking of the autocannons, they're Oerlikon's KDAs, which are each capable of firing up to 550 rounds per minute. The rounds can be high explosive, making them ideal for destroying an aircraft's shell and frame, or armor-piercing for when the Gepard is needed to take out a ground-based target. Typically, the gunners will fire between 20 and 40 rounds at a target to take it down, with each of those rounds capable of traveling up to 2.17 miles, plenty of range to take out incoming aerial targets. As for the radar systems, the Gepard comes with 2. An S-band search radar is typically stashed at the top rear of the turret. There's also a Ku-band Doppler tracking radar fitted to the turret's front, with each of these radars having a range of 9.3 miles. The upshot of this extended range is that the gun can track an incoming threat several miles before it approaches a target, giving the gunners plenty of time to line up their shots by the time the target is within the autocannon's 2.17-mile range. The Gepard is also equipped with night vision capabilities, making it as effective in low-light conditions as it is during the day. And it has a radio, enabling the crew to communicate with reconnaissance teams on the ground to supplement its radar tracking system. Of course, such a valuable anti-air asset requires protection, which comes in the form of steel armor installed on the turret and hull. As mentioned earlier, the Gepard's armor isn't as thick as that of the Leopard 1 tanks used as the foundation of its design, but it's still 70mm thick, which makes it more than capable of protecting the weapon from small arms fire, shell splinters, and 14.5mm rounds. Unfortunately, a direct shell strike will render the gun useless, though that's no different from what would happen to a typical tank when struck by an artillery shell. In a callback to its tank-based roots, the Gepard is also equipped with smoke grenade discharges that can be used to conceal its presence from incoming threats. Last but not least, when it comes to the Gepard's special features, there's the gun's speed. The tank chassis comes into play here too, with the Gepard being equipped with the same 830 horsepower diesel engine used in the Leopard 1 tank. That kind of power gives the gun a top speed of around 40 miles per hour, which provides a high level of movability while allowing it to keep pace with troops that are on the move. It all adds up to a powerful anti-air system that can be deployed quickly, fire in all weather conditions, and only requires extremely short reaction times on the part of the gunner. And thanks to its 3-person crew, including a driver, the gun can even be moved as it fires, making it a more difficult target for incoming missiles and drones to hit. There's just one problem. It's a Cold War-era weapon. Russia has been rightfully lambasted for using Soviet-era tanks and artillery in its war against Ukraine, with these weapons often falling prey to Ukraine's advanced defensive systems. It could be argued that it's hypocritical to laud the Gepard as a game-changing weapon for Ukraine when it comes from the same era as Russia's outdated tanks. Perhaps except for two things. First, the Gepard was a long way ahead of its time when it was produced, and its radar systems are still more than capable of tracking incoming threats today. What's more, the turret's maneuverability, combined with these radar systems, enables the Gepard's gunners to track and attack drones and similar small threats faster than contemporary missile-based anti-air systems. After all, 550 rounds per minute will reach a target a lot quicker than a volley of missiles, which will take time to launch and travel. It might be a bit long in the tooth, but the Gepard is extremely effective at dealing with small and fast-moving targets. Forbes military writer David Axe reinforced this point in a September 2023 piece in which he lauded the Gepard as the best air defense gun in the world, even 50 years after its creation. He notes one former Gepard commander saying that the gun's radar system is so accurate that it can lock onto birds, a comment that hints at its usefulness at combating drones. Axe also points out that the 60 or so Gepards that Ukraine has received from the US and Germany in 2024 aren't the only units it's received. It also took delivery of 52 refurbished Gepards from Germany's stockpiles in April 2022, just 2 months after the war started. Around 15 of those initial 52 came from Qatar, where they'd been used to defend the Qatari skies during the 2022 FIFA World Cup tournament. Several still carried the distinctive Qatari camouflage, but more importantly, all 15 had been refurbished and maintained properly, meaning they arrived in Ukraine capable of reaching their maximum potential. That's important because condition matters with the Gepard. After all, there are only 570 in the world, and the last one was made in 1980. New Gepards simply don't exist, making it paramount for Ukraine that the Gepards they receive are properly maintained. And that brings us to the second factor that makes the aging Gepard such an effective weapon for Ukraine, a fact that can be summed up in one word: upgrades. Militarny reports that the latest batch of Gepards being delivered to Ukraine via the US aren't the originals that Germany built for itself. Instead, they're all from a batch made between 1977 and 79 for the Netherlands Armed Forces under a different contract. Those upgraded Gepards received the smokescreen system previously mentioned, in addition to the upgraded radar and Dutch guns that have greater capacity for adjustment. The radar in question operates on the X-band, rather than the S-band used for the German Gepards, and uses circular polarization rather than horizontal. That's important. Circular polarization comes with several advantages, including better tag or target readings. With the X-band, the Gepard's tagging capabilities aren't affected by the polarization of the object being tagged, meaning it achieves more reliable reads and can tag an incoming object from almost any angle. Circular polarization also offers greater depth and orientation tracking, allowing the radar to establish several tags at once, regardless of whether the targeted objects are flying in different orientations. Throw less susceptibility to signal interference into the mix, and it's clear that the latest Gepards arriving in Ukraine are even more powerful than those Germany supplied back in April 2022. They achieve more reliable readings, meaning they're capable of taking out more incoming targets. So it's clear that the Gepard is a powerful weapon, despite its age. Now we come to another question: what makes the Gepard so important to Ukraine? For starters, as the US Defense News YouTube channel points out, the Gepard was originally designed to counter low-flying attack helicopters, and the weapon still serves that purpose in Ukraine today. Since the war began, Ukraine claims to have destroyed 310 Russian helicopters, though most of those encounters took place during the first year of the conflict. It's unknown how many, if any, of those choppers were destroyed using Gepard guns, with many seemingly falling victim to drone attacks. Still, Ukraine's early success against Russia's helicopters has forced Putin to use these aerial assets sparingly since 2023. The Gepard likely plays a large role in that. The threat it presents to low-flying helicopters means Russia is far less likely to use them when trying to strike targets in Ukraine. In that sense, the Gepard is important as it serves as a deterrent. The gun's mere presence is enough to force Russia to change its strategy so that it can't offer helicopter support to its troops on the ground. However, far more important to Ukraine is the Gepard's other ability, taking out drones. They also seem to be effective in engaging small targets, such as the Iranian-made kamikaze drones that Russia uses, according to US defense news. We touched on this earlier in the video when discussing the Shahid drones Russia has purchased from Iran and used as part of its missile strikes against multiple Ukrainian targets. Radio Free Europe provides more details about these drones. It appears Russia is using both the Shahid 136 and Shahid 131 in its kamikaze drone attacks. The Shahid 131 is an earlier version of the Shahid 136, introduced in 2021. It's smaller, weighing just under 300 pounds at takeoff and carrying a warhead weighing between 22 and 33 pounds. But its small size is advantageous as it makes the Shahid 131 difficult to track and allows it to be maneuvered into tighter spaces than the Shahid 136 is capable of reaching. As for the Shahid 136, it weighs in at a much heavier 440 pounds and is a much larger 11.4 feet long. The drone is built in the delta wing style, using rudders at its tips to keep it stable in the air. But the most dangerous thing about it is the warhead it can carry, 88 pounds of explosive installed in the nose that detonates upon impact with a target. Its range is impressive too. The Shahid 136 can travel for over 1,500 miles at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. Worst of all for Ukraine, the drones are cheap. They're made using off-the-shelf components, with no complicated military tech needed to get them into the sky. The cost-effectiveness has made the drones a source of derision in some circles, as they've received the mocking moniker of lawnmowers because of the distinctive sound they make when in the air. But make no mistake, cost-effective does not mean easy to tackle. These drones are fast and small enough to make them very difficult to track for most anti-air defense systems. Most, but not all. The Gepard is uniquely positioned to serve as the perfect counter to both of these threats. Given that it's capable of tracking small birds from miles away, the far bulkier Iranian drones show up on its radar long before they reach the gun's position. That early tracking gives the gunners time to aim, with the volleys of dozens of powerful rounds fired being more than enough to take out a Shahid drone long before it can deliver its explosive payload. That's precisely how Ukraine has used most of its Gepards. They're predominantly stationed near key military targets and cities that Russia is likely to strike. Rattling off hundreds of rounds per minute, Gepards are taking out Russian drones by the dozen, which brings us to another reason why the weapon is so important to Ukraine. The Gepard is a vital support system. The reason is the powerful radars built into the guns. According to the Kyiv Post, these radar systems are capable of communicating with other anti-air defenses, allowing the Gepard to serve as a spotter for the Man-Portable Air Defense System or MANPAD operators on the ground. These MANPAD operators use weapons like the American Stinger or the Soviet-era Igla to destroy larger targets than the Gepard can take down alone. So the Gepard has also become a vital component of Ukraine's mobile air defense groups. Given that it's essentially a tank in terms of its design, the Gepard can travel to a location where a strike is anticipated and start scanning the skies for incoming threats. The coordinates for larger threats, such as incoming fighter jets, cruise missiles, and Shahid 136 drones, are sent to the MANPAD operators. And of course, the gun itself starts firing as soon as any of those targets come within its 2.17-mile range. The result is an integrated mobile anti-air defense approach, whereby Ukraine can use the Gepard both for its firing capabilities and to help other anti-air systems take out incoming threats. You can see why, for Ukraine, the Gepard is such a powerful addition to its aerial defenses. However, the weapon is not without challenges. The Kyiv Post points out that for all its power, the Gepard still comes from the Cold War era. As a result, it isn't rational for Ukraine to deploy it on the front lines or use it for its original purpose of shooting down low-flying helicopters. Some modern Russian attack helicopters are capable of launching anti-tank missiles from ranges of up to 6.2 miles, far outside the range of a Gepard's guns. That doesn't mean the weapon is useless against helicopters. Any that fly within its range are likely to get shredded before the pilot even knows what's happening. But deploying the Gepard on the front lines would give Russia opportunities to fire on it from miles behind the front lines. The gun's age would also factor against it here, as the 70mm thick steel armor installed around the turret isn't strong enough to stop modern anti-tank munitions. As a result, Ukraine doesn't risk its valuable Gepards by deploying them on the front lines. It keeps them back to defend key military installations, or sends them out of part of a roving air defense force to take out incoming missiles and drones. Another challenge lies in the limited number of Gepards that were produced. Despite the weapon's effectiveness, only 570 were ever made, with the most recent being manufactured in 1980. That means the newest Gepard gun is still over 40 years old, which creates a host of problems when it comes to maintenance and simply sourcing usable units. The Gepards that Ukraine has either received or is due to receive account for close to a fifth of all the Gepards in existence. And each of those units has been properly maintained, refurbished, and, in some cases, upgraded for use against Russia. If Ukraine needs more of them, where can it get them? In fact, how many Gepards are there even left to get? Brazil has 34 of the weapons, none of which are likely to find their way to Ukraine. Despite supporting the immediate withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine, Brazil hasn't provided any military aid. The country's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, claims that he wants to end the war between Russia and Ukraine rather than join it, which puts the kibosh on any chance of Brazil's 34 Gepards arriving in Ukraine. But Ukraine may have more luck with Romania. The country has provided military aid to Ukraine since the beginning of the war, including a Patriot missile launcher and multiple armored vehicles. And Romania is the home of the Borcea Base 86, which is where Ukraine's pilots have been training to fly F-16s. The country also has 41 Gepard guns, though it's committed none of them to Ukraine so far. That may change in the future, but for now, it means that another 41 of the 570 Gepards are out of Ukraine's reach. Add Brazil's stockpiles to that number, and you get 75 Gepards that Ukraine can't access. As for other countries, Belgium once owned 55 Gepard guns, though it withdrew them from service and sold them all to private companies. Add that to the total of unavailable Gepards and you have 130. Chile also ordered 30 Gepard guns in 2008, only to withdraw them from service 3 years later. A proposed upgrade program for those 30 Gepards failed, and it's likely that they're now unsuitable for use in Ukraine. Even if they're still fully functioning, Chile appears to be taking a similar approach to Brazil in that it supports Ukraine's sovereignty, but it isn't actively sending military aid. That's another 30 Gepards crossed off the list, bringing the total unavailable to Ukraine to 160. As for the rest of the Gepards that aren't in Ukraine, most are owned by Germany and the Netherlands, of which the latter still has 35 Gepards after selling 60 of its original stock of 95 to Jordan. Those are the 60 Jordanian guns that the US has purchased to send to Ukraine. But what of the remaining 35, plus the several hundred owned by Germany? Sadly, none of those Gepards are likely to find their way to Ukraine. The Netherlands withdrew their guns from service in 2006, placing them in storage and likely decommissioning them. The same goes for the majority of the German Gepards, which were all phased out by 2012 due to their high maintenance costs. Even if these guns are still in storage, they haven't been maintained for well over a decade and may no longer be viable. So it's very possible that the Gepards Ukraine has are all of the Gepards that it's going to get. There's a similar problem with the ammo. When the Gepard was first manufactured, ammunition production was contracted out to Switzerland, which exclusively made the 35mm ammo that the weapon uses. Ukraine needs more ammunition. In its way is Switzerland's policy of neutrality, which has been in place since 1515. Though that policy has come under increasing pressure during the Ukraine war, with Switzerland having provided some non-military aid to Ukraine, the country has refused to create more of the ammunition Ukraine needs for its Gepard guns. Thankfully, Rheinmetall has come to the rescue. One of the original manufacturers of the Gepard, the company received a contract to produce 300,000 rounds of 35mm ammunition for the Gepard in February 2023, with the first shipment being delivered to Ukraine in September of the same year. Those rounds can't come quick enough for Ukraine, especially as the Gepard can burn through several thousand of them in a single engagement involving multiple drones. And that brings us back to what the Gepard can do on the battlefield and how it complicates things for Putin's air force. Ukraine now has a steady supply of ammunition for this powerful aerial defense platform, along with a promise that 60 more Gepard guns are on their way, courtesy of the US. Those guns will prove vital in defending against incoming drones and helping man-pad operators on the ground to target larger threats. This is a huge problem for Russia's air force. It now faces a reinvigorated weapon with a new purpose, taking down a core component of Russia's aerial assault. With Gepards in place, Ukraine is much better equipped to defend itself against the missile and drone strikes upon which Putin has increasingly relied during the Ukraine war. Ukraine's challenge now is protecting the Gepards it already has from Russian countermeasures, because once the 60 from Jordan have all arrived, that's likely to be the last they'll get. But what do you think about the Gepard? Do you think this Cold War-era gun has the power to severely impact Russia's aerial threat? Will Ukraine risk using these guns on the front lines, and if they do, how do you think they'll fare against Russian bombs and artillery?
It was supposed to be an impenetrable fortress,
Packed with Russia's best aerial defenses, Khalino Air Base was home to the Russian Air Force's 14th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment. It was also close enough to Ukraine to allow Russia to carry out glide bomb campaigns. Russia needed this base to keep up the pressure on Ukraine's brave defenders. Now, it lies in ruins. It was the target of a brilliant missile strike that shows just how much smarter Ukraine's military tacticians are than those in Russia. The strike on Khalino wasn't just about missiles, it was a masterclass in using modern warfare tactics to destroy a key enemy position. Khalino is totally obliterated, and in this video we're going to explain what Ukraine did and how it pulled off the feat of destroying one of Russia's most important military sites. But first, a different question. Why did Khalino Air Base matter? Its position gives us a large part of the answer. Khalino is a little over 4 miles east of the city of Kursk, and it's part of the Kursk Oblast that Ukraine invaded in August 2024. That positioning also meant that the airbase was around 31 miles away from Ukraine's northern border, a close proximity of which Russia took full advantage. For much of the war, Russia used Khalino to batter northern Ukraine with its powerful glide bombs. The base, as mentioned earlier, was home to the 14th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment, with that regiment having 24 Sukhoi Su-30SM fighter bombers at their disposal. Rather than using these Su-30SMs to enter Ukraine, Russia had them take off and fly over Khalino and the surrounding territory. From there, they would release their Fab glide bombs. These terrifying bombs are repurposed from the Soviet Union days, and they pack a massive explosive punch. Most are made using 1.5-ton Fab 1500 bombs, which each contain around 440 pounds of explosives. For comparison, a single Russian 152mm artillery shell packs around 14 pounds of explosives, so a Fab 1500 is roughly 31 times more powerful than an already devastating artillery shell. However, these bombs wouldn't be of much use to Russia alone. Ukraine's ability to counter Russia's fighter jets has led to the country practically avoiding flying over Ukrainian territory altogether. That would have stopped it from dropping its Fab 1500s were it not for a clever innovation: wings. Using special kits, Russia equipped its old Fabs with wings that allow them to glide for several dozen miles after being dropped from an Su-30. These glide kits typically cost between $20,000 and $30,000, with Russia's little innovation allowing it to take advantage of old munitions in ways against which Ukraine couldn't previously defend itself. And taking advantage is what Russia did. In March 2024 alone, it launched around 3,000 of its glide bombs, achieving a rate of nearly 100 per day. Not all came from Khalino, of course, but the base was one of the many Russia used to decimate Ukrainian targets from within the safety of its own territory. It's clear why Khalino is such a strategically important site for Russia. The base itself was home to just one 8,200-foot runway, though it also contained alert pads, facilities for storing fuel and ammunition, and command centers, and similar buildings for air and technical crews. This was a built-up and active airbase. Ukraine knew that. It had felt the force of the Fab 1500 glide bombs launched from Khalino, and it wanted to do whatever it could to minimize the impact the base could have in Russian President Vladimir Putin's special military operation. That's why it attacked Khalino several times before it launched its invasion of Kursk. In December 2022, it attempted a drone attack that left an oil reservoir near the base in flames. Footage published on X post-attack shows flames erupting in the wake of the strike, along with plumes of black smoke rising into the air the morning after. Another video clip shows Russian firefighters desperately trying to put out a rampant blaze, though with little success. It's believed that the strike also disrupted the airbase's command facilities and damaged some base support targets. It was a successful strike, but it wasn't anywhere near enough to take Khalino offline. Ukraine kept trying. Around 8 months later, Ukraine used its innovative cardboard unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, to attack Khalino again. These cheap and lightweight UAVs carry a small warhead along with large amounts of metal shrapnel. When the drone explodes, either intentionally or because it's been struck by Russia's aerial defenses, the metal shrapnel showers down onto the area directly below. The sharp metal pieces penetrate whatever they land on, including aircraft hulls, causing death or forcing long-winded repairs to damaged weapon systems. The attack is believed to have damaged several of the fighter bombers Russia was using to launch its glide bombs at Ukraine. The attack also appears to have killed several of the base's senior leaders as they inspected one of the downed Ukrainian drones. We can only speculate here, but it seems likely that the drone's warhead was triggered when the senior leaders came in range, catching them in a blast and showering them with razor-sharp shrapnel to terminate them. Pravda reports that these 2023 drone attacks killed the commander of the 14th Air Regiment stationed at Khalino, along with his deputy, some airfield workers, a handful of pilot officers, and a representative of Russia's FSB counterintelligence organization. Another small victory. One more attack took place on 31st of July 2024. This one involved a Neptune missile, Ukraine's self-made long-range missile that has a range of around 248 miles. That managed to destroy another ammunition depot in Khalino. So Ukraine was slowly chipping away at the Russian airbase. However, none of the strikes did enough damage to take it entirely out of commission, meaning the glide bomb assaults didn't stop coming. Russia responded to these attacks by improving Khalino's defenses. Following the 2023 drone attacks, Russia equipped Khalino with a pair of high-tech and extremely valuable weapon systems. The first was at least one S-400 to accompany the S-300s already installed at the base. Known as the SA-21 Growler to NATO, the S-400 is an aerial defense system that fires surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs, at its targets. The system has been in service since 2007 and is both ground-based and mobile enough to be transported via vehicles to different facilities. Its range is between 155 and about 248 miles, depending on the version used, with its warheads typically packed with about 315 pounds of high explosives that fragment upon impact with a target. The S-400 may also soon be loaded with 77 N6 missiles, designated as hit-to-kill weapons that Russia can use to simply shoot targets out of the skies. It's Russia's premier aerial defense system. The S-400 is supposedly capable of detecting stealth aircraft, along with being able to destroy incoming Tomahawk and precision-guided missiles. It's also capable of tackling multiple targets. The system can engage up to 36 aerial threats at once. That alone would be a solid defense. However, Russia reinforced its installation of an S-400 at Khalino by also installing a 64 N6 Tombstone at the airbase. Though the name may conjure up images of another dangerous weapon, the Tombstone is actually an advanced radar that Army recognition calls a cornerstone of Russia's aerial defense network. It's designed to detect and track incoming aerial threats, essentially working as a radar command center for the S-400 to ensure the SAM launcher is pointing in the right direction when it aims and fires. The Tombstone operates on the S-band frequency and produces 3D phased array radar images that allow Russian commanders to easily see up to 100 incoming targets simultaneously. Those targets can vary, as does the system's detection range. Cruise missiles and aircraft can be tracked up to a range of 186 miles. Tombstone can also track ballistic missiles incoming from distances of up to 621 miles. All of this adds up to a radar system that can detect incoming threats and send key information to the S-400 to fire long before a target reaches its location. It's also capable of detecting targets flying at high altitudes and high speed. Its radar ceiling is 88,582 feet, meaning it can easily detect most non-ballistic missiles and aircraft. Tombstone can also detect objects traveling up to 6,213 miles an hour, which is around Mach 8. At least those are the specs Russia wants the world to believe. But assuming those specifications are accurate, the Tombstone forms a lethal combination with the S-400. It tracks incoming threats no matter how fast or high they may be flying, relaying detailed radar images to command centers and the S-400 itself so that the SAM launchers can be far more accurate when firing. The Tombstone can also link up with Russia's older S-300 systems, meaning it would have been a valuable addition to Khalino even without the S-400. Think of the Tombstone as the eyes of Khalino's aerial defenses, with the S-400 and S-300s being the fists. And it's this combination that gave Khalino its reputation as being nearly impenetrable after the earlier Ukrainian strikes. And it got worse for Ukraine. With the Tombstone in place, Russia could start using its S-400s and S-300s to target Ukrainian civilian targets near the border. The anti-aircraft missiles intended to shoot down aerial targets were instead fired in ballistic missile trajectories. Combine those missiles with Russia's guided bombs, and you have a lot of explosives headed toward the likes of Sumy and potentially Kharkiv. The addition of the S-400 was a problem for Ukraine. But the Tombstone at Khalino made striking the base difficult but also mission critical if Ukraine was to relieve the pressure it felt on the northern front of Putin's special military operation. And in late November 2024, Ukraine somehow managed to pull off the impossible by obliterating the well-defended Khalino airbase. The question is obvious. How did Ukraine manage it? The answer starts on November 18, 2024. When news started circulating that President Joe Biden had finally granted Ukraine approval to use American-made ATACMS weapons on Russian territory. That approval appears to have come with some caveats, the main one being that Ukraine should only use the missiles to support its defense of the territory it's taken in Russia's Kursk region. Still, this was a massive step. For the first time since the war began, Ukraine had access to reliable and battle-tested long-range missiles it could now use to strike into the heart of Russia. And it was a long time coming. The US had refused to allow the use of these missiles inside Russia for months, leading to Biden's policy turnaround, likely due to America wanting to avoid further escalation of the war by Putin. Bases like Khalino were obvious targets. ATACMS can travel for up to 190 miles before touching down on their targets.
putting Khalino well within their range. Getting ATTRIBUTIONS' permission was massive for Ukraine, but those missiles alone wouldn't have been enough for Ukraine to pull off the amazing strike it managed on November 25th. Those missiles still had to get past those powerful Russian defenses at Khalino. A Kyiv Post examination of the strike reveals how those defenses were laid out. A map of the base shows that its most built-up areas lay to its north. That's where Ukraine would find Khalino's weapons handling facilities, along with many of its aircraft, its runway house, and the technical and mechanical support systems needed to keep the base running. It's also where Khalino's revetments lie. Their barricades serve to support Khalino's anti-aircraft weapons, namely the S-300s and at least one S-400, and provide cover for its fighter jets. Those are the defenses that Ukraine would need to bypass if it were to stand any chance of striking the most valuable targets at the base. However, those northern weapons were also supported by principal defense and sensor complexes over a mile away in Khalino's east. It's here where the Tombstone likely sat, along with a pair of S-400 erection and launch vehicles. So there were some defenses to the east and some to the north, all working in tandem to defend the airbase's most valuable northern targets. As far as Russia was concerned, Khalino had a solid defense structure, and Russia was right. Ukraine would have to pull off something special if an ATTRIBUTIONS was to evade these defenses. Experience gained from the previous attacks on Khalino also taught Russia that Ukraine was most likely to attack from the south. That's why the Tombstone was set up to the east, perfectly placed to detect and intercept missiles and drones heading to the base from the south before they could reach their northern targets. There was only one problem. Ukraine had no intention of striking from the south. Instead, it was going to target the most important part of the entire Khalino defensive setup, the Tombstone that supported the base's entire radar network. Taking out the Tombstone would mean blinding the entire base. It wouldn't take the S-400s and S-300s offline. They could still fire, but without the Tombstone, they would have no way to detect their targets in the air. A lucky hit would be all they could manage once the ATTRIBUTIONS started flying. So how did Ukraine take out the Tombstone? The odds are that it dazzled it with a deceptive drone display. That's according to the Kyiv Post, which says Ukraine likely decided to hit Khalino from the north rather than the south, as it had in other attacks. Long-range strike drones were chosen for the job, with those drones likely being sent in large numbers and combined with several of the UAVs Ukraine has used already to great effect against Russia. Silent UAVs such as the Brownmore and Puma would have flown alongside faster strike platforms. Each drone would have had a well-calculated flight track to ensure that all of them converged on Khalino's north at the same time. From there, Ukraine began a phased wave attack. The slowest and quietest of the drones headed in first, drawing closer to the target area and within range of the Tombstone. Remember what we said earlier, Russia's radar system can track up to 100 targets at once. These slower drones were the first of those targets, and they were quickly followed by the faster UAVs Ukraine sent to the airbase. Each of these drones was a decoy that existed to max out the Tombstone's tracking limits and absorb fire from S-300 and S-400s. The diversion would also have seen the drones taking varying paths, with some heading to the west while others headed out east. Again, confusion was the goal. With the drones spreading out, Russia's automated defenses naturally started trying to shoot them out of the sky. Next up, the strike drones. As the decoys drew fire, the strike UAVs circled and headed into Khalino from the east, precisely where the Tombstone was stationed. In addition to taking advantage of the decoy drones, these strike drones would also have used the base's topography to shield them from Tombstone and the S-400s until it was too late. Those strike drones engaged the Tombstone, taking it out before it had a chance to relay instructions to Russia's other aerial defense systems. That opened the door for Ukraine's ATTRIBUTIONS missiles. As this dazzling drone display was going on, and perhaps minutes before the strike drones took out the Tombstone, Ukraine would have launched its ATTRIBUTIONS toward the airbase. The ballistic missiles flew to an altitude of around 200,000 feet and arced their way toward the airbase. The Tombstone wouldn't be able to track them at that height, and by the time they started coming back down, Russia's radar network was completely trashed thanks to the strike drones. That left the S-400s and any other aerial defense systems Russia had at the base. Those systems were all linked to the Tombstone, meaning they were left firing blindly into the sky at the decoy drones. That worked out well. The remaining Ukrainian strike drones likely targeted the SAMs that the S-400s and S-300s were firing, creating a clearer path for the incoming ATTRIBUTIONS. Khalino was blind and practically defenseless, perfect prey for the ATTRIBUTIONS missiles approaching at about 2,300 miles per hour. As those missiles were about 200 feet above the base, they exploded, not because of any Russian hits, rather they exploded by design, with each scattering around 950 cluster bombs around the base. Those bomblets absolutely devastated Khalino, taking out many of its remaining weapon systems and essentially rendering the base useless. The aftermath tells the full story. On November 26th, Russia's defense ministry was forced to release a statement. As usual, tried to downplay Ukraine's success by saying that the strike had caused insignificant damage, while adding that 3 of Ukraine's 5 ATACMS got through to the base. It even shared pictures of what it claimed to be debris from the attack. Other footage and evidence from the base seemed to mock those claims. The New Voice of Ukraine published a photograph appearing to show several ATACMS striking down on their target. Footage shared on X and reported on by Forbes also appears to show a Russian service member filming the attack. The words, "It's exploding," precede what appears to be a cluster of ATACMS bomblets streaming across the ground. But it's the preliminary reports on the strike from Ukraine that reveal what is likely the true scale of the damage. Ukraine's military says the combined drone and ATACMS strike not only took out the Tombstone, but also destroyed at least 2 of Khalino's S-400 air defense systems. That means no more long-range strikes from Russia's SAM launchers. We conclude with a final question. What does this mean for Russia? Ukraine's strike on Khalino represents a strategic shift in the Ukraine war in several ways. The strike itself has damaged Russia's ability to launch its glide bombs into northern Ukraine, relieving pressure on that particular front. Taking out Khalino also means damaging infrastructure and disrupting supply lines that may have served the 50,000 Russian and North Korean troops currently trying to retake Kursk from the Ukrainian defenders. We also can't underestimate the psychological blow the Khalino strike wrought on Russia. If any confirmation was needed that Ukraine is allowed to use ATACMS in Russian territory, Khalino offered all the proof Russia required. It also showed Russia that Ukraine's tacticians know exactly what they're doing. They won't be firing ATACMS blindly. Every missile strike is coordinated and built using a strategy that ensures maximum damage. Forbes also notes that the hit on Khalino deprives Russia of a key frontline staging base for its drone attacks, as well as creating a gap in Russia's air defenses that Ukraine could exploit. Perhaps that might be enough for Ukraine to send F-16s into Kursk to support its embattled troops in the region. Time will tell. For now, Ukraine has just struck a powerful blow, both literally and symbolically, against Russia. With Khalino out of commission, Ukraine has shown once and for all why it's been calling for the US and other Western partners to allow it to use long-range missiles in Russia. It knows exactly what it's doing. But what do you think about the Khalino airbase strike? Could Russia have done anything better to prevent the strike from happening? What impact will Ukraine having permission to use long-range missiles in Russia have on the war?
When you're trying to conquer one of the largest areas in Eastern Europe, a little over 233,000 square miles to be exact, which is roughly the size of Texas, and you're running low on tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, aerial drones, and trained military personnel, you can be pretty sure you're failing miserably. Add an increasingly evaporating number of military aircraft to the equation, and it's time to hit the panic button. Be it land or sky, Putin just can't seem to hold on to his weapons. And it's not just embarrassing, it's downright self-destructive. In the case of aerial warfare, it is disastrous. For Russia, of course. Here's the thing. Air power should have been Putin's biggest advantage in Ukraine. When Putin's invasion began in February of 2022, experts and analysts were seriously gloomy about the smaller country's ability to defend its airspace. Most assumed that Russia's much-vaunted air force, the VKS, would be able to quickly overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses and gain a decisive early advantage in the conflict. Even the most optimistic assessments assumed that Russia's air campaign would destroy Ukrainian jets on their bases, while using large-scale ballistic and cruise missile strikes to blind the country's surface-to-air missile radars. This would have forced Ukraine to move its SAM systems away from the front lines, leaving it at a severe early disadvantage and increasingly vulnerable to Russian sorties. But these predictions, often from top conflict analysts, proved to be completely wrong. In more than a year of war, Russia has utterly failed to establish air superiority, while managing to lose staggering quantities of its jets and other assets. In fact, the situation is so bad that earlier this month, one pro-Russian blogger on Telegram, usually cheerleaders for the invasion, stated that the country's air force has engaged in complete idiocy and is detached from reality. Definitely not a good look for Putin. So how has this colossal embarrassment happened? As usual, there's no single answer here. But like other aspects of Russia's failure in Ukraine, it has a lot to do with the long-term issues plaguing the country's military: corruption, bad strategies, poor training, and more. These certainly aren't new issues, but the war in Ukraine has exposed how much they've come to affect Russian capabilities. To get a better picture of how this has happened, let's start with a super quick look back at both fighter jets and air defense systems from the starting point of the most exciting eras in aircraft development, the jet age. The so-called jet age kicked off in the late 1940s, spurred by profound changes in the field of aeronautics. The jets developed during this period could fly faster, higher, and farther than older piston-powered aircraft. This would soon come to transform the aviation industry in both its commercial and military forms. By using the technology of jet propulsion, Many pilots believed they could outrun their enemies in the skies and theoretically create total air superiority. Using jet propulsion, aircraft could vastly increase their speed, a major reason why aircraft-mounted guns were mostly replaced by missiles. By far the most reliable way to shoot a supersonic jet out of the sky. Still the go-to weapon for aerial combat today, aerial missiles also revolutionized the nature of air defenses. Today they rely almost entirely on surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs, to prevent hostile attacks from the sky. And from the 1970s onwards, it also became possible for infantry troops to take down aircraft with their own portable handheld anti-aircraft missiles. These man-portable air defense systems, or MANPADS, are highly cost-effective shoulder-fired rockets able to lock onto aircraft using infrared homing. They are also easy to use, able to be taught to new recruits in a matter of minutes or hours. And since the start of last year, Ukrainians have shown the world just how valuable MANPADS can be. As Putin's invasion began, Western nations assumed the Russian Air Force would be among the most significant challenges for Ukrainian defenders. When Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov visited Washington in November 2021 to press for weapons, he reportedly told American officials, "We have to prepare now. Point number one is air defense." So NATO members sent thousands of MANPADS into Ukraine to shore up the country's surface-to-air capabilities. Among others, these weapon transfers have included American-made Stingers, high-velocity British Starstreak missiles, and even surplus Soviet EGLOS systems. And this decision really paid off. These comparatively cheap air defenses managed to stop Russia from obtaining air superiority by imposing asymmetrical costs on any Russian pilot dumb enough to enter Ukrainian airspace. For example, using one 60,000 to 80,000 EGLOS missile, Ukrainian soldiers have been able to down a $36 million Su-34 bomber or an $85 million Sukhoi Su-35S fighter jet. This huge cost differential has had effects across the battlespace in Ukraine. Because modern combined arms warfare is highly dependent on air support, Russia's failure to dominate the skies has had serious repercussions. The inability to provide sufficient air cover for its tanks, infantry, artillery, or supply lines is one of the reasons Russian forces have taken such devastating losses. Caught in the open, these troops have been falling prey to a range of Ukrainian ambushes from hidden positions on the ground. But does the failure by Russia to achieve air superiority mean a lack of Russian aircraft? Kind of, but not exactly. Ukrainian troops near the front lines around Bakhmut have told reporters that Russia continues to fly daily sorties in hopes of catching their targets unaware. Most of these flyovers last only moments. Russian fighter jets or bombers, often flying in groups of 4, fly at low altitude over a target area before quickly dropping or firing their payloads and hightailing it back to their bases. Less maneuverable attack helicopters will also fly right up to the line of combat before firing their missile salvos and quickly fleeing to safety. Another reason for this is the recent addition of the powerful Slovakian S-300 missile defense system to Ukraine's arsenal. This longer-range surface-to-air missile can target Russian jets at higher altitudes, forcing them to fly lower to screen themselves from attack. And in turn, the lower altitude flights have made them extremely vulnerable to shoulder-mounted missile systems. Because of the medium-range S-300s and shorter-range threat posed by Ukrainian MANPADS, no Russian air assets are able to spend extended periods of time near the front. Despite the obvious difficulty of shooting down even a low-flying aircraft, the Ukrainian strategy seems to be working pretty well. One report from mid-May 2023 suggested that Ukraine had downed 4 aircraft in a single day of fighting. While Ukrainian commanders would not confirm their role in the attack, the country's defense ministry stated that the Russian craft ran into some trouble. Numbers like this highlight the focused and effective use of MANPADS, with soldiers using constant vigilance around the clock to exploit the tiny 3 to 5 second firing window. Ukraine's surprising ability to contest its airspace was also partly what allowed it to go on the offensive late last year. Some of this was done with Turkish-made Bayraktar drones, which were used to destroy high-value targets like Russian surface-to-air missiles. This strategy, one that Russia has failed in executing itself, allowed Ukraine to launch more attacks from the air without fear of being shot down. Ukraine also used what limited air power it had in some very creative ways. During the sinking of the Russian Black Sea flagship, the Moskva, Ukraine used a drone to distract the ship's anti-air capabilities before launching a salvo of Neptune anti-ship missiles before the unlucky crew could react. Other tactics have included dispersing aircraft and air defense units out of major airfields, vacating certain air defense positions before they could take any losses from Russian fire, and operating their air defense SAM batteries as pop-up units. rather than large batteries with support vehicles. This final tactic proved to be extremely valuable, stopping Russian forces from effectively targeting most of Ukraine's air defenses. While we now take for granted that Ukrainian soldiers will find creative and deadly ways to use its lesser capabilities, it is still no small feat. In fact, the creative use of air power highlights that Ukraine may now have a better understanding of air operations than even many NATO countries. David A. Deptula, a retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General, has argued that the West can actually learn from Ukraine here. We've become so dominant in the air that we've never had to think through how we would use air power if we were the inferior force, he said. Ukraine is posing us some very interesting questions that we should seriously consider, if only to understand how a clever opponent would take us on. Russia, on the other hand, has continually failed to learn from their abysmal performance in the skies. And as with so much else, Russia's systemic failure to establish air superiority also points to the larger issues within the country's military. This became noticeable early on in Ukraine when, rather than overwhelming force, only 1 or 2 aircraft at a time conducted strikes against targets in and around Ukrainian cities close to the borders, including Kyiv, Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, and Mariupol. And when pilots missed their targets, they very rarely mounted follow-up strikes. At that same time, Russian military planners apparently made no plans for large-scale bombardments of air defenses themselves. In fact, they have seemed entirely unable to coordinate the large, complex formations necessary for fighter jets and helicopters to cover each other from enemy fire. More than almost anything else, this helps explain Russia's baffling inability to establish control over the skies, despite its qualitative and quantitative advantages. Western air forces have long taken for granted the ability to coordinate the timing and positioning of their attacks in campaigns like the Balkans, Iraq, or Libya. However, the level of planning, logistical, and command and control capacity needed for such air campaigns is massive. Every pilot needs to coordinate and understand their role in the broader operation, including the exact timing and route needed to strike multiple targets. Tanker support is also critical to ensure refueling can take place at established rendezvous points. The complexity only increases once actual combat begins, as various fighters tasked with destroying air defenses, those engaging enemy aircraft, bombers, electronic warfare escorts, and search and rescue teams must all work seamlessly together and adapt at a moment's notice. Russia has failed on basically all of these fronts. Many Russian pilots are trained to fly exclusively in pairs or fours, with little exposure to larger maneuvers or formations. They also get far fewer flying hours than NATO crews, do not have tanker support for most operations, and are not trained in large-scale aerial combat doctrine. Lacking all these elements, it's no wonder that Russia could not carry out a Western-style air war against Ukraine. And even in the instances where the Russian Air Force scored victories against Ukrainian positions, they were unable to capitalize on those strikes due to fear of manpads and larger surface-to-air missile systems. When Russia refocused its troops in the Donbas region during April of 2022, they were able to gain some localized air superiority near the new front lines, mainly through the use of artillery strikes against Ukrainian SAMs. But even when they were actually able to gain this limited control of the skies, Russia utterly failed to turn it into any type of concrete battlefield advantage. As one analyst from the London-based Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, put it, the primary reason for this is that despite having more than 300 modern fast jets with theoretically flexible capabilities to carry a range of air-to-air and air-to-ground munitions, most Russian aircrew have very limited opportunities to drop precision-guided munitions in realistic training scenarios. Another major factor is actually hitting their targets, as many of Russia's jets do not have targeting pods, a standard feature on most Western military aircraft. In fact, while Russia's Su-34 fleet of jets have forward targeting systems and can use precision-guided munitions, they're just about the only ones. The rest of Russia's fighter jets have very limited capability to identify and destroy any battlefield targets which do not show up on radar. This means they've pretty much been limited to attacking fixed targets with satellite or TV-guided weapons, or dropping unguided bombs and rockets at predetermined coordinates. One observer noted they are literally cratering empty fields, while an anonymous official from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency told reporters early this year that under half of all Russian missiles are hitting their aim point. We're holding Russian missile success at just below 40%. In Donbas, this incredibly poor performance has meant Russian jets cannot effectively support ground operations, leaving troops open to a range of ambushes and other tactics. But how did the Russian Air Force end up in such a sad state, especially when Putin ordered a modernization of the fleet just a decade ago? The answer, as with so many things in Russia, seems to be a product of the country's structural issues. While the modernization was supposedly intended to make modern combined force operations easier, it appears to have been mostly for show. One part of this has been inefficiency and widespread corruption. For example, in 2012, one Russian arms company received nearly $26 million to develop an aircraft system for intercepting non-strategic missiles. But the research never actually happened. The company signed the fraudulent contracts with shell companies, the addresses of which were registered to the addresses of public toilets in the Russian city of Samara. In another case from 2016, one company responsible for supplying radio navigation equipment and control systems for guided munitions had a similar scandal. Its top leadership were caught in an embezzlement scheme where they faked research and development techniques in order to steal millions through fraudulent contracts. This type of corruption is common and widespread, also reaching beyond Russia's military-industrial complex and into the top levels of its political elite. So much personal wealth is on the line that some experts argue it has completely changed the incentive structure for Putin's top officials. Most of these individuals own property far beyond their official levels of income, signaling a range of corrupt deals. In turn, these security officials have less incentive to give actual expert advice, which could disappoint Putin and lose them access to their sweet kickbacks. And as mentioned before, poor training and an inflexible command structure compounds these issues. As Phillips O'Brien, professor of strategic studies at University of St. Andrews, has written, though much was made of the flashy new equipment, such as the much-hyped Su-34 strike aircraft, the Russian Air Force continues to suffer from flawed logistics operations and the lack of regular, realistic training. Above all, the autocratic Russian kleptocracy does not trust low-ranking and middle-ranking officers, and so cannot allow the imaginative, flexible decision-making that NATO air forces rely upon. So when Russian pilots actually have a chance to act flexibly and change their attacks to hit something, bad commanders and rigid doctrine do not allow them to improvise. Instead, they have to try to pull off their standing orders, even if those are likely to fail or lead to their untimely demise from Ukrainian air defenses. It really doesn't look like the situation will get better for the Russian Air Force either. The VKS has shown no sign of changing tactics and seems very hesitant to even use its best jets in the field. This might be because Western sanctions have hit the Russian aerospace industry particularly hard, quickly eroding Russia's ability to obtain the components needed to produce new advanced fighter jets. This became evident in a January call where Putin publicly attacked Denis Manturov, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Trade and Industry. Previously a favorite of Putin, Manturov was humiliated when he explained that the country was unable to obtain the contracts needed for new parts. One Moscow-based defense analyst even told reporters that you have to ask yourself if Manturov is going to be the next one of Putin's cronies you read about mysteriously falling out of a window somewhere. But the corruption, sanctions, and mounting losses of aircraft in Ukraine seem to have made actually getting the parts an impossible task. This is pretty obvious when we take a look at Russia's 3 production facilities for Sukhoi aircraft. Despite their massive size, analysis from last year shows that they only produced 31 aircraft during 2022, falling far short of the orders placed in state defense contracts. Essentially, as Rand Corporation analyst John V. Paracchini recently put it, Russia's aerospace sector isn't likely to have aircraft to sell, even if it wants to. At the end of March 2023, Ukraine's Armed Forces General Staff claimed at least 305 aircraft had been destroyed since the start of the war. While Russia has reportedly even resorted to stripping the microchips from household appliances to replace its losses, it isn't nearly enough. One Ukrainian defense executive stated that production for some of the most critical subsystems for Russian fighters has almost seized up. Problematic items like the Su-35's Irbis passive electronically scanning array radar antenna can require a year or more, and that is in times of no embargoes, no supply disruptions. These problems are even greater for Russia's fleet of bombers, such as the Tupolev Tu-95 and Tu-22M3. While Russia has maintained some domestic production capacity for its fighter jets over the years, mainly due to demand from abroad, this isn't the case for bombers. Once the current fleet begins to break down, there is literally no way for Russia to replace them. This is one of the main reasons why many analysts and experts now call Russia's equipment losses in this area irreversible, with no chance of restoring stockpiles to pre-war levels. The situation for Russia's Air Force is also likely to get worse once Ukraine begins receiving the Western F-16s. Retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Dan Hampton stated in a recent interview that compared to an F-16, the Russian Su-35 is essentially junk, adding that our planes are more durable. I wouldn't bet in combat on the Su-35 or any Russian-made aircraft. F-16s are versatile multi-role combat aircraft, which come in 1- and 2-seater models. Since 1979, the F-16 has been continuously upgraded, giving the newer models advanced radar and other capabilities. With a top speed of 1,500 miles per hour, a 33-foot wingspan, and 50-foot length, Hampton points out that the F-16 is very hard to see because it's smaller than most aircraft, especially when it's aimed directly at you. Each also has one M61A1 20mm multi-barrel cannon and can carry 6 air-to-air missiles. While this payload can pack a serious punch, the Russian planes should also be deadly if used correctly. The Su-35 is a twin-engine, single-seat fighter jet, which the RAND Corporation has called Russia's signature heavy fighter bomber. While the Su-35 is reportedly faster than the F-16, able to reach Mach 2, it does not have the same powerful active electronically scanned array radar, making it a more vulnerable and obvious target. Colonel Hampton has pointed out that the Su-35 is easy to use, easy to pick up on radar, and easy to shoot at with a long-range missile. Part of this is because it's such a large plane, with a 50-foot wingspan and a length of nearly 70 feet. And as Hampton stated, the Su-35 is a typical Russian machine and looks good, but deep down it's not really that good of a plane. But which jet is actually superior? Well, it really might come down to who is using it. As David Jordan, co-director of the Freeman Air and Space Institute at King's College London, pointed out, that on paper, it can be argued that the Su-35 has an edge over the sorts of F-16s the Ukrainians are likely to get, but that doesn't tell the whole story. Like anything else, the effectiveness of each jet will depend largely on its pilot, their training, and the tactics they employ. Seeing as Ukrainians have already held their own so effectively, there is reason to believe this won't change soon. Combined with their use of manpads, Jordan has argued that I would suspect that the F-16s in Ukrainian hands will represent a formidable challenge. Other experts suggest that the context in which a battle occurs will determine how well the F-16s stack up to the Su-35. Retired British Royal Air Force Commodore Andrew Curtis told Newsweek that if it comes to dogfighting, the F-16 is still one of the best in the world. However, the Russian pilots are likely to try and fight a standoff battle using medium and long-range missiles. If they can do this successfully, that may tilt the balance in the Su-35's favor. But regardless, it seems unlikely that Russia will be able to achieve more than the brief localized air superiority it held last year. Since Ukraine's capabilities are only growing, with more and more Western support, there is little chance of Russia making any real gains. With Russia hemmed in by manpads and other surface-to-air systems, and unable to replace or make more of their advanced jets, it seems only a matter of time before Ukraine starts to retake the airspace in its east. So, to sum things up, it has truly been a terrible year for the VKS. The war in Ukraine has exposed its fundamental weaknesses, while sanctions and enormous losses have seriously harmed its future outlook. Unable to even use the advanced jets it currently has correctly, Russia's Air Force is not likely to see any improvement soon. Ukraine, on the other hand, has been able to adapt and use superior tactics to overcome its numerical weaknesses. Once the Ukrainian Air Force gets its hands on some F-16s, the tide of war may turn even faster. But what do you think? Why has Russia's Air Force been failing so badly? And will Ukraine continue to hold its own in the skies?
On the brink of 2024, Sweden's bold leap into the NATO fold marked more than just a policy pivot. It heralded a revolution in European defense dynamics. With a history of military non-alignment stretching back to the Napoleonic Wars, Sweden's strategic about-face in the face of Putin's aggression underscores a significant shift in the balance of power in Northern Europe. Yet beyond the strategic maneuvers on the geopolitical chessboard, Sweden introduces a game-changer into NATO's arsenal, the Saab JAS-39 Gripen. This isn't just any fighter jet, it's a technological marvel, brimming with features set to redefine aerial combat dynamics. Key among these is its cutting-edge AESA radar, paired with sophisticated electronic warfare and countermeasure capabilities, all underpinned by the ability to evolve through software updates, and this is just the beginning. From its first flights challenging China's aerial might to its potential role in bolstering Ukraine against Putin's forces, the Gripen stands as a testament to Sweden's quiet yet formidable military prowess. How does this jet fit into NATO's strategic puzzle, and what could its inclusion mean for future conflicts? As we unravel Sweden's dramatic entrance into NATO and the Gripen's capabilities, let's dive into a story of technology, tactics, and the reshaping of military alliances, starting with the basics. The Gripen is an advanced fourth-generation fighter that was conceived in 1979, had its maiden flight in 1988, and entered service with the Swedish Air Force in 1996. It's a multi-role plane capable of carrying out air superiority and ground attack missions. It also has uses away from the skies over the battlefield. For example, the United Kingdom uses the Gripen as a training platform. The fighter was in demand enough that Hungary requested and got approval for 4 more Gripens to add to its air fleet in exchange for dropping its objections to Sweden's entry into NATO. Over 300 Gripens have been built as of 2023, and the aircraft is currently in service in 7 countries, ranging from Thailand to Brazil. But there's more. The Gripen doesn't just come in one flavor, it boasts an array of models, each with its own unique strengths. The basic specifications are a top speed of Mach 1.8, a maximum takeoff weight of 13 tons, a range of about 1,850 miles, and a combat radius of about 500 without external fuel tanks. It has a service ceiling of about 50,000 feet. The Gripen comes armed with a variety of missiles. For air-to-air missions, these include the short-range RB-74 missile, which is the Swedish version of the AIM-9 Sidewinder, and the Iris-T missile. For longer range, the Gripen comes with the RB-99 missile, which is an equivalent to the AIM-120 AMRAAM. The Gripen can also use the Beyond Visual Range Meteor missile against even longer range targets up to about 125 miles away. For attack missions, the Gripen can carry the RB-75 air-to-ground missile and various bombs like the GBU-12 laser-guided bomb, Mark 82 unguided bomb, GBU-39 small diameter bomb, and DWS-39 anti-armor dispenser weapon. It can also carry the RBS-15F anti-ship missile. Just in case, the Gripen comes with a 27mm Mauser BK-27 cannon for dogfighting. The Gripen's standard configuration is a single-seat fighter, but the Gripen B is a twin-seat version for training and other specialized missions. The earlier versions were powered by a single engine, the Volvo Aero RM12 turbofan, but the modernized JAS-39E and F planes use the F414G, a derivative of General Electric's F414, which can provide 20% greater thrust. To carry more weapons, the Gripen E comes with 10 hardpoints. Its standard payload is to carry 2 visual range missiles and up to 7 beyond visual range missiles. It also comes with a new radar, replacing the previous Doppler PSO-5A radar of the previous versions. Instead, the new Gripens have an AESA radar, the Selex Galileo Raven ES-05, created by the Italian defense contractor Leonardo. This radar extends the fighter's range and situational awareness. The Gripen E also comes with an infrared search and track system. Saab claims that the Gripen E can use human-machine collaboration to allow the plane to be an extension of the pilot's mind as much as possible. The company also claims that the Gripen E has embedded AI capability through a future-orientated cockpit design, which features a wide-area display. The company says that this feature makes it easier for the pilot to make critical decisions. The WAD prevents the information in a user-friendly way, which supports the pilot's ability to select, launch, and guide weapons in perfect coordination with other members of a tactical air unit. The Gripen E's AESA radar is installed on a movable plate mounted on the aircraft's nose. This clever feature allows the Gripen pilot to concentrate the radar perpendicular to the direction of the plane, so it would not need to be flying in the direction of Russian airspace to get an understanding of what might be coming from the east. Such awareness means that Gripen pilots will have an information advantage, better equipping them to understand first and act first against an adversary. This information can be analyzed and shared with other assets, as Saab says the fighter has sensor fusion and cross-domain data gathering. These are qualities usually associated with the F-35, but Sweden has shown it can do some of the same things with the Gripen. The Gripen E's improved radar also comes with more advanced electronic warfare measures and countermeasures. The new avionics system was built for open architecture, allowing software updates to continually improve the plane. This feature is one of the reasons why Saab claims it no longer makes sense to count the generations of aircraft. According to this viewpoint, the Gripen blurs the line between 4th and 5th generation fighters. Indeed, it's arguable that the Gripen, especially in its E and later configurations, has better situational awareness than any other 4th-generation fighter and is perhaps second only to America's 5th-generation fighters, the F-22 and F-35. This feature makes the Gripen valuable to NATO as an intelligence platform in addition to its capabilities as a fighter. Its movable radar also helps to make the Gripen E more survivable in combat, as it can launch its missiles and then turn perpendicular while still pointing its radar in the direction of the enemy to ensure a clean hit. The Gripen, even in its less advanced C and D versions, has an electronic warfare suite specifically designed to counter the radars on Russian fighters and SAM sites. The fighter's presence in NATO's air fleets therefore adds more preparedness and operational capability against the Russian aerospace forces and Russia's missile defense systems like the S-300 and S-400. The Gripen E can not only jam enemy radar, but mimic it. In this regard, it can act like a double agent, sending false information to the enemy. Because of its designed acclimation to Russian systems, the Gripen could prove particularly valuable in this capacity. But how does the Gripen shield itself in the thick of battle? The Gripen, especially the E version, has multiple ways to protect itself. There are of course the standard chaff and flares, but it goes far beyond those countermeasures. The Gripen E's radar mimicry includes the ability to fool enemy radars into thinking there are more friendly aircraft in the area than there really are, giving the Gripen virtual decoys to protect it from missile attacks. To protect it further, the Gripen can also carry towed decoys, little buddies. These decoys can also act as offensive assets by jamming enemy radars. Finally, the Gripen can launch Bright Cloud self-contained capsules that continually attack enemy electronic systems and further protect the fighter against incoming missiles. The situational awareness provided by its AESA radar and other technologically advanced features are enhanced even more by the Gripen's ease of operation. This comes partially because of a computerized fly-by-wire flight control system to stabilize it in flight. In contrast, the F-16, its closest equivalent, is more maneuverable but less stable. In an interview with the Military Aviation History Channel, one Gripen pilot said that because the plane is so easy to fly, the operator has more time to make the appropriate decisions. Naturally, there are many items that demand a pilot's attention, so the less time the pilot needs to spend on operating the plane itself, the more time the pilot will have to analyze the situation and make these decisions. The Swedish pilot explained that when flying at altitude, the Gripen can be controlled with pedals beneath the feet. This feature frees the pilot's hands to pay attention to other matters. The Gripen can fly with ease at low altitudes. Pilots are allowed down to a range of 100 feet before they are considered to be flying tactically. The pilot also explained that the information on the screen display can be fed into the helmet, allowing the operator to lock onto targets by looking at them rather than looking down at the screen. This allows the Gripen pilot to engage multiple targets on a rapid basis. 4 targets at different locations can be engaged simultaneously in this way, with 10 priority targets tracked, but the Gripen's sensors can track many more total targets than this. The Gripen is not a stealth fighter, but because it uses composite materials through much of its airframe and has a delta wing design, it has a smaller radar cross-section than other 4th-generation fighters like the F-16. Some reports suggest that it has a radar cross-section of about 1.5 square meters, which is truthfully not much more than the upper estimates of the supposedly 5th-generation Russian Su-57 Felon. As one can guess from its payload, the Gripen has long been compliant with NATO standards, meaning that it has easy interoperability with the alliance's munitions, communications, and data networks. Saab is also in the process of adapting the Gripen E into Gripen Maritime, a carrier-based variant. Such a capability gives the first hint of the overall impact this fighter has on the NATO alliance. It will increase Russia's disadvantage even further in the Baltic. Sweden has no aircraft carriers in its navy, but now that it's in NATO, Gripen Maritime may soon be capable of landing on the carriers in the fleets of allied navies. Because of the Gripen's speed and light weight, by comparison the F-35 has an empty weight of about 13 tons compared to the Gripen's weight of 7. It's an ideal fighter for quick reaction and dispersed missions, the latter of which has not been emphasized as much in NATO since the end of the Cold War, according to the Military Aviation History Channel. The Gripen has other advantages. It was designed to be cost-effective. While the Gripen E is expensive at about $85 million per plane, the earlier C and D variants, which still make up the bulk of the world's supply, are significantly cheaper at about $30 million a pop, and even the E price is modest compared to other cutting-edge modern fighters. For example, various sources estimate France's Dassault Rafale to cost between $100 and $120 million each, and the cost of a Eurofighter Typhoon is about $125 million. The F-15EX, which is expected to be operational in the summer of this year, costs around $93.5 million each. Aside from the unit cost, the Gripen is cheap to operate. A study from Janes in 2012 estimated that the Swedish fighter cost about $4,700 per flight hour in that year's dollars to operate. Its closest competitor was the F-16 Block 4050, which cost about $7,000 per flight hour. In contrast, the Rafale came in at about $16,500 per flight hour and the Typhoon at $18,000. The low cost is one of the reasons why some Western analysts suggested sending the Gripen to Ukraine as well as the F-16. The Gripen comes with other benefits that could prove useful to the Ukrainian war effort and previews what it brings to NATO. Because the Gripen was designed to suit Swedish needs, it was built to operate in rugged conditions. These include a cold climate, tough bases, and being able to perform its mission with limited maintenance. A November 2022 report by Britain's Royal United Service Institute suggested that the Gripen was by far the best candidate for a Western fighter to send to Ukraine, over and above the F-16s that have gotten so many headlines. Of the currently available Western fighter aircraft that could possibly be supplied, the Swedish Saab Gripen CD offers by far the most suitable candidate in terms of operational requirements. It was designed from the outset for ease of maintenance and can be refueled, rearmed, and given basic maintenance by teams of just 6 ground crew using 2 vehicles on small airbases or highways in cold weather. Moreover, only one of each crew needs to be a highly trained maintainer, the rest can be conscripts or even troops. One of the things RUSI is referring to is the Gripen's onboard digital self-diagnostic system, which makes it easier for less experienced crews to maintain it in remote bases that do not have much infrastructure. RUSI also noted that American fighters like the F-16 need long, high-quality runways and much more extensive hangars and ground support to take off and operate. This infrastructure is naturally vulnerable to Russian missile and drone attacks. The Gripen, on the other hand, was designed to operate with shorter, more rugged and more dispersed runways, making them more difficult for Russian missiles and drones to target. These are some of the dispersed operations that NATO had neglected since the end of the Cold War, when the Russian nuclear threat seemed to ebb into the background. Because of the Gripen's skid-resistant landing gears and its ability to use its canards as an air brake by tilting them, it can land on runways only 600 meters long, or even on highways. This would give the Ukrainians many more options to fly the Gripen in comparison to the F-16, which will need more extensive crews to maintain and air bases that require heavy defending. Unfortunately for the Ukrainians, there have been far fewer Gripens built in comparison to the F-16, a few hundred as compared to thousands. As such, NATO countries are not in a good position to donate these planes to Ukraine. Even so, some momentum has recently developed for sending these aircraft to the Ukrainian Air Force. Ukrainian pilots have tested the Gripen, and Stockholm has made some hints about sending Gripen C and D aircraft to Ukraine. There had been delays during Sweden's complicated bid to join NATO, but now that this process has been completed, the possibility has been reopened. While Sweden has not made a decision on sending the Gripens to Ukraine, Saab said at the end of February that if it should get approval from Stockholm, it will be able to transfer the fighters fairly rapidly and is preparing to do so. Michael Fransson, the chief marketing officer of Saab, said, "There remains a big push coming from inside and outside of Sweden for us to send the Gripen to Ukraine, and we stand ready to provide these should a decision be reached by the government on this." The Gripen has never entered combat with an enemy plane, but a little-known exercise from November 2015 leaves a more direct clue about its potency against Russian fighter aircraft in particular. Over the course of 7 days, Thai Gripen C and D fighters easily defeated China's J-11 fighters in simulated combat. The Thais lost only 9 Gripens in exchange for 41 Chinese aircraft over a period of 4 days. The J-11 is a derivative of Russia's Su-27. The Gripen's advantage came because of its superior situational awareness in BVR combat. 88% of the Gripen's kills had been achieved at ranges in excess of 19 miles, while the J-11 only got 14% of its kills at such a range. At ranges over 31 miles, the Thai Gripens scored 10 kills, while the Chinese planes scored none. Chinese sources later confirmed the disadvantage their planes had been in. One of China's most seasoned pilots, Li Chunghua, also admitted that the Gripen's cross-section was significantly smaller than the Su-27 and its Chinese derivative, and that the Russian design could fire only one R-77 type missile at a time, in contrast to the Gripen's 4 AIM-120s. China's domestic J-10 type fighters performed better against the Gripen in subsequent years, but to make matters worse for the prospect of Russia in an air war with NATO, Lee admitted that the Gripen E would have performed even better against the J-11. The tables turned once combat entered visual range, because the Gripen lacks thrust in comparison to the Russian design and were likely using outdated AIM-9L short-range missiles. This would be of little comfort for Russia in an air war over Europe though, because NATO's Gripens would be using the modern AIM-9X, and even in 2015, few of the engagements came at visual range. Because of improved radars, visual range fights would be even rarer now. The Gripen has similar experiences to prove itself over its fourth-generation peers in NATO as well. In 2006, Sweden participated in the United States Air Force's exercise Red Flag. This exercise is held several times a year in Nevada and Alaska and aims to simulate realistic air-to-air combat for American pilots and their international allies. On the first day, Sweden's Gripen scored 10 kills and no losses. In another Red Flag exercise, a single Gripen shot down 5 F-16s. Meanwhile, in NATO's Loyal Arrow exercise over the skies of Sweden in 2009, a single Gripen shot down 2 F-15 Eagles and forced a third to retreat. As the F-15 was the world's premier air superiority fighter until the arrival of the F-22 Raptor, and one which had never been shot down in combat, this was an even more notable feat. We will need to wait and see if the Gripen gets to replicate these results in its first real combat test in the mission it was designed for. Ukraine is certainly eager to try. Either way, now that NATO has the Gripen's home country in the alliance, these fighters can bring welcome new combat capabilities to the alliance's collective defense. They can be positioned in hard-to-reach areas in rough climates all throughout Europe, making them difficult for Russia to target. NATO therefore has more capabilities to patrol its increasing collective border and add to deterrence. The Gripen can gather intelligence and do all of the things that advanced fourth-generation fighters should do, for a much better price and more robust survivability. Sweden's entry into the alliance means that 100 more Gripen fighters have entered NATO's combined fleet overnight. With the Czech Republic and Hungary's Gripens, NATO now has over 128 Gripens in its arsenal. Sweden has long been an object of jokes in internet memes that poke fun of a supposed wimpy attitude, but the country's military was always quietly far more capable than these comedic jabs gave it credit for. For centuries, it's been wary of the threat coming from Russia, and the Gripen was designed specifically to meet such a threat. The vast enlargement of NATO's Gripen fleet with Sweden's entry brings its combined air fleet formidable new capabilities in the Baltic and on its eastern frontier, making Russia's disadvantage in the skies that much more acute. Putin had hoped that this invasion of Ukraine would prevent NATO from getting any stronger. Instead, it's now even stronger, in large part thanks to the capable and cost-effective Gripen the Russian aerospace forces now need to deal with in large numbers. Oops. But what do you think about Sweden's Gripen fighter and what it brings to NATO's overall capability? Russia's Su-57, Putin's first stealth fighter in service since December 2022, has been through a rollercoaster of development woes and skepticism. Yet despite its impressive tech, doubts remain about its true capabilities, especially its stealthiness. So what's the deal with its long road to completion, and can it really slip under the radar like it claims? Let's dive in. Tom Cruise is no stranger to impossible missions. For several decades, perhaps with a bit of assistance from the Hollywood special effects department, he has been fighting bad guys in fast-moving action sequences on sea, land, and in the air. In 1986, in the film Top Gun, he piloted a state-of-the-art, fourth-generation US F-14 Tomcat against fictional Russian MiG-28s. In 2022, he returned to the cockpit of the by-now out-of-date F-14 to dogfight against fifth-generation advanced Russian fighters. Cruise, in the guise of ace fighter pilot Pete Mitchell, manages to shoot down 2 enemy aircraft. He downs one of them the old-fashioned way, with a burst of cannon fire. Another member of his squadron manages to account for another one. In this second version of the film Top Gun, the plane the movie directors chose to represent the bad guys was a real aircraft, the Russian Su-57 single-seat multi-role stealth fighter. Since its original maiden flight back in 2010, this is a plane so rarely seen in the skies that it might almost be a fictional aircraft. Ironically, if Maverick and his buddies had shot down 3 Su-57s in real life, that would have probably accounted for the entire Russian serviceable fleet of stealth fighters. Joking aside, Russia's Su-57 fighter is Russia's first attempt to join a very exclusive club of nations, those that can boast a stealth fighter within their air force. Information is always a little bit hazy around Russian military equipment. We think the Su-57 officially became operational in December 2020. Until then, it was only China and the United States that had stealth fighters. The Su-57 has had a painful and protracted birthing process that has spanned decades, cost billions of rubles, and seen 2 of the aircraft written off in accidents before it was operational. It may have been used in combat against Ukraine in the last couple of years, but we only have the claims of the Kremlin and little in the way of independent confirmation. But the Su-57 certainly seems to be a high-tech and capable aircraft, and Western analysts have been taking a keen interest in its development. So why has it taken so long to develop? And is it any good? And perhaps more to the point, is it stealthy? Before we get to that, let's start with what seemed to be a promising origin story. Founded by Pavel Sukhoi in 1939, the Sukhoi Design Bureau has developed a long and proud tradition of producing combat aircraft in the service of first the Soviet Union and then Russia. Sukhoi produced fighter and ground attack aircraft during the Second World War. From 1945 onwards, the company embraced the new challenges in technologies offered by the arrival of the jet engine, producing fighters, bombers, and reconnaissance aircraft. Sukhoi also branched out into civilian aircraft. In 2006, the Russian government merged several aircraft companies into the United Aircraft Corporation. Sukhoi was part of this merger, alongside Mikoyan, Tupolev, Ilyushin, and several other legendary Russian aircraft designers and manufacturers. And thus the development of the Su-57 began. Here's how it went down. Almost as soon as a new piece of high-technology military equipment comes into service, designers and planners are already looking ahead and thinking about its replacement. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union was looking ahead for the next generation of combat aircraft to provide the fighters of the 1990s and beyond. The concept was to have an aircraft capable of a range of tasks, able to attack targets in the air, on the land, and at sea. Experimental projects were initiated, and some fell by the wayside amid cost increases and program delays. One fighter prototype only took to the air in 2000 and was, at that point, 9 years behind schedule. The Russian Defense Ministry started afresh and in 1999 released a new set of requirements for a fighter aircraft that could, for cost reasons, replace both the MiG-29 and the Su-27, both sizable fleets of aircraft. It was intended that the aircraft should be smaller than its predecessors as well, to fit in with limited budgets. The Sukhoi development team took part in the invitation to submit proposals. It came down to a competition between Sukhoi and MiG. In April 2002, Sukhoi was selected and invited to produce prototypes, with an intended flying trial date somewhere in 2007. At the time, the aircraft design had a prototype name of the T-50. Sukhoi themselves are speculated to have used the American F-22 Raptor as a baseline guide for their design of a stealth fighter. The Sukhoi aspiration was for a family of stealth aircraft to emerge out of the Su-57 design work. Because much of the technology was very new, as the design of the aircraft proceeded, other aircraft were used as testbeds for aspects of the T-50, such as the weapons bays, engines, and flight control systems. Sukhoi made use of their own Su-27 multi-role fighter for this, and even retained some of these innovations on the Su-27 to make an upgraded Su-27. This proved so successful that the Russian Defense Ministry bought this new Su-27 version and renamed it the Su-35. The Su-35 is actually quite similar to the Su-57, apart from the stealth aspect, which the Su-57 reportedly has and the Su-35 does not. The project started to come together. The basic design was approved in 2004, and this triggered the release of more Defense Ministry funding into the project. In August 2007, the Russian Air Force announced the development was complete and that trials would soon be starting. The Soviet Union and Russia have marketed their military hardware all over the world. A fifth-generation stealth fighter aircraft would be no exception. Getting a large overseas order early on would take the financial pressures of the Su-57 project. India had bought much Russian military equipment in the past and expressed very strong interest in acquiring the Su-57. There was talk of potential sales of 200 or 300 aircraft. A deal was signed between Russia and India in 2010. But this is where cracks literally started to emerge in the program. A dozen flying and non-flying prototypes had been produced. Although flight testing and the maiden flight were due to begin in 2007, the flights were delayed. There were problems with the engines, flying trials were pushed back to 2010, and when they did take place, it soon became apparent that the airframe structure had significant problems. Stress cracks were appearing after only a few flights. The Sukhoi designers scrambled to find solutions and had to implement some major design adjustments in order to reinforce the basic aircraft structure. In June 2014, one of the prototypes caught fire just after landing. Although the pilot escaped unharmed, the aircraft was written off. Some of the parts and components were cannibalized for use with the other prototypes. The original plan had been to start delivering production versions of the Su-57 from 2015. This clearly was not going to happen. The delivery date slipped to 2020. During these unforeseen difficulties, the Russian government began to reassess and reduce its purchasing plans for the aircraft. The Russian Defense Ministry would buy 52 Su-57s by 2020 and then another 150 by 2025. But the program remained troubled, as purchasing plans and delivery dates all fluctuated. After Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea from Ukraine in 2014 and the subsequent low-intensity conflict in eastern Ukraine fought by Russian-backed separatists and covert Russian forces, international sanctions began to impact on Russian finances. The Russian defense industry relied on importing high-tech Western electronics and other equipment. These important components became harder to access on the open market. Sanctions were to become even tougher when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. India started to back away from the big purchase order of Su-57s and in 2018 cancelled the deal completely. Large-scale production of what was a very expensive aircraft was now looking very doubtful. But in 2019, Russian President Vladimir Putin jumped in to tip the scales, perhaps even with his eye on a coming war with Ukraine. In May, the Kremlin released a statement that 76 Su-57s would be bought and would be delivered by 2028. But production of the aircraft remained slow. Reportedly, one was made in December 2020, and another 4 had emerged by the middle of 2022. Despite the problems, the aircraft had now flown publicly at airshows, and analysts had been able to take a look. The aircraft was light, maneuverable, and agile. Commentators were impressed. Marketing brochures and Kremlin official statements hyped up the capabilities, not least the fact that it was a stealth aircraft with long-range strike capability. But good intelligence analysts try not to take anything for granted. If it could do everything that the brochure advertised, the Su-57 would represent a very credible opponent for current US and NATO frontline fighter aircraft, such as the Eurofighter Typhoon, the F-22 Raptor, and the F-35 Lightning. But one former US pilot wryly observed, "Is it a current threat? Well, not now, because there is only one of them." Another ex-pilot observing the smooth takeoff and acrobatics of an Su-57 at an airshow was impressed but slightly dismissive of the fancy aerial display designed primarily to please the tourists. He was more interested in how the aircraft would perform with a full load of fuel and a heavy payload of weapons. Despite Putin's apparent faith in the aircraft, on December 24, 2019, the first official production-grade aircraft crashed while being delivered to an airbase. The pilot ejected and survived. The cause is unclear, but is believed to have been some form of control system malfunction. So what sort of capabilities have been advertised for the Su-57? The aircraft stats look impressive, reporting a speed of Mach 2 to 2.1 and a ceiling of 20,000 meters. A high fuel carrying capacity appears to give it a much longer range, 1,500 kilometers, just under 1,000 miles, than its Su-27 counterpart. It also has the option to fit an extendable refueling probe to further increase the range. Later production models are intended to receive a newly designed engine, the Isdalai 30, to deliver more power and performance. The Su-57 is capable of supercruise, maintaining flight speeds beyond Mach 1 without having to use high-fuel expensive afterburners. The Su-57 has 6 radars to enhance pilot situational awareness. The N-036 Bielka radar has a range of 400 kilometers. The F-16, about to be received by Ukraine, only has a range of 300 kilometers. It can carry many different permutations of weapon types, missiles, cruise missiles, and bombs, enabling it to strike at ground, sea, and air targets. A GSH 30mm automatic cannon provides a small anti-air or air-to-ground attack capability. Apparently, hypersonic missiles are being designed with the Su-57 in mind. The infrared search and tracking system can handle multiple targets. But let's spend a little bit of time thinking about the main selling point for the Su-57, its stealth capability. Inevitably, these specialist skills are closely guarded state secrets. but we can make a few observations. A stealth aircraft is simply an aircraft that has been designed to make it harder for radar to hit the aircraft and bounce back to the radar receiver and produce a ping or a blip on the radar screen. This can be achieved with several careful shaping features to the plane's outline. The Su-57 aircraft has incorporated many measures indicative of stealth capability. The wing and control surfaces are carefully shaped and angled. For stealth missions, the weapons are carried in 4 internal weapons bays, rather than hanging off the outside of the aircraft, which would make the aircraft more radar visible. Large parts of the aircraft surface are treated with radar-absorbing material, RAM. A key search and track sensor faces backwards when not in use, with the forward edge treated with RAM. The pilot canopy has been prepared with a metal oxide coating to reduce the radar profile. Extra care has been paid to every aspect of the assembly of the aircraft. Every rivet has to be flush with the fuselage or otherwise concealed. When assessing an aircraft's stealth capability, the experts talk of a radar cross-section. They mean what aircraft profile is visible to a radar system. By one estimate, the Su-57's radar cross-section, or RCS, is 30 times smaller than that of the Su-27. But some Western analysts suggest that although the frontal radar cross-section may be reasonably effective, the profile from the rear looks to be less well concealed. This would mean that it's probably harder to pick up on the radar if it's coming straight at you, but it might be more visible from the side or the rear. A crucial selling point for military hardware is whether you can point to a credible track record of military success. The Su-57 does not have this. Or does it? It's actually quite difficult to give a definitive answer. The Russian Defense Ministry has claimed that the Su-57 has been used in action in Syria and in Ukraine. This is hard to verify, but let's take a look at what we do know. Our journey begins in Syria. In late February of 2018, 2 Su-57s reportedly landed at the Khmeimim military airbase on Syria's Mediterranean coastline. Khmeimim is directly adjacent to the Bashar al-Assad International Airport and, since 2015, has been effectively handed over to the Russians as part of their military operation in support of the Assad regime. It's well defended by Russian military personnel and air defense systems, and is a key logistics and accommodation node for Russian forces. The base has come under attack from shelling and drones in 2018. The Su-57s came accompanied by other aircraft, including Su-25s and 35s. Depending on the route taken, this could have been a flight of 1,000 kilometers or so, providing a good flight trial in its own right. It's possible that another couple of Su-57s also arrived at Khmeimim a few days later. What the Su-57s did there is unclear. It may simply have been a public relations exercise to demonstrate Russian capabilities and global reach. The aircraft were only there for a few days. After they departed, the Russian government made reference in March to Su-57 combat trials in Syria and claimed on 25th of May that an Su-57 had fired a cruise missile in combat. Later that year, the Russian Defense Ministry released footage of the Su-57s in flight and stated that 10 flights had taken place. It seems highly likely that the Su-57s dipped their toes into the Syrian conflict, but overall, this looks more like a PR stunt than a serious military deployment. Okay, but what about Ukraine? Russian claims that the Su-57 has been active during the invasion of Ukraine have been more persistent, but equally difficult to prove. Although it might seem a bit of a no-brainer that the Russian military would want to use their best aircraft in a large-scale war on their border, using the Su-57 over Ukraine would be fraught with military and reputational dangers. According to estimates, there are perhaps 10 to 15 Su-57 aircraft in total. It's fair to assume that not all of these would be operationally ready at any one point in time. This amounts to a very small potential strike force, and one that could not realistically afford to lose more than 1 or 2 in combat. Multiple Russian sources started claiming that the Su-57 was used in action during the war, from 2 or 3 weeks after the start of the invasion. On 22nd of June 2022, Russian state media referred to the Su-57 combat operations in relation to Ukraine. On the 5th of November 2023, Russian media claimed that the Su-57s had been active over Luhansk, a region of Russian-controlled eastern Ukraine. Perhaps more credibly, the British Ministry of Defence Intelligence Group have assessed that the Su-57 has almost certainly been used in the war. Okay, so what could this mean? The Russian Air Force has suffered catastrophic losses during its invasion of Ukraine. According to plausible estimates, well over 300 aircraft from a Russian Air Force operational strength pre-war of around 900 aircraft.
The Ukrainian air defense system has greatly improved during the conflict and now presents a very effective shield against Russian aerial encroachment. This looks likely to have caused the Russian Air Force to limit the amount of aircraft it risks to actually fly over Ukrainian territory. It is likely that US and NATO intelligence-gathering aircraft operating over NATO or international airspace in Eastern Europe are scooping up as much information as possible regarding Russian air deployment activities and operations and relaying this to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. Many Russian air attacks are now conducted from Russian aircraft firing long-range missiles from Russian airspace. But even this does not make them entirely safe. Ukrainian air defense weapons include the Patriot, which has a range of 50 to 100 miles. Drones and other missiles also put Russian aircraft at risk on their bases inside Russia. So it's likely that Russia is remaining highly cautious with the Su-57 over Ukraine, not wishing to overplay their hand and expose it to undue risk. From what we've seen so far, the Su-57 is being used to undertake just enough aerial activity to be able to claim operational experience, but not enough to use it in a serious way that might knock out key Ukrainian military targets by using its stealth capability. If an Su-57 crashed in Ukraine, it would be a major propaganda blow for Russia and potentially a rich source of technological and tactical intelligence information made available to the Ukrainians and their Western allies. The views from the Ukrainian military suggest they certainly do not rule out the possibility that the Su-57 has been deployed in some way. One Ukrainian colonel observed that it's hard to identify specific aircraft types from the radar screen. The Su-25 and Su-35 can conduct similar non-stealth attacks with a similar profile. The colonel may know a little more than he's letting on. Perhaps the only real proof that a Russian stealth fighter was operating over Ukraine would be if a Ukrainian ground target suddenly exploded and the Ukrainians were at a complete loss to explain who had done it. That would be the perfect demonstration of a stealth attack. Conversely, however, if a Russian stealth attack was seen on the radar and easily intercepted, the Su-57's credibility would be instantly blown. So the question is, does Mr. Putin feel lucky? One thing's for sure, it's been a troubled path for Sukhoi's 5th-generation stealth fighter, and unfortunately for Russia's Su-57 program, it looks to be having very similar problems to the Russian T-14 next-generation main battle tank program, which we covered in one of our previous episodes. Both projects have struggled with design issues, have little to show for several decades of effort, and are now struggling with funding, technology, and a lack of crucial overseas sales. There are very few, only handfuls really, of the equipment known to be in existence, and no convincing demonstrations that either the aircraft or the tank are operationally ready in any meaningful sense. But work is still ongoing. Sukhoi is developing an Su-57 upgrade, known as the Su-57M. Flight trials of the Su-57M reportedly took place in 2022. There has been talk of a smaller naval version capable of landing on an aircraft carrier, but Russia does not have a viable carrier force at present. Perhaps of more immediate interest, in July 2021 there was reporting that a 2-seater variant of the Su-57 was being built. This was described as a training version, but also something that might provide for a weapons officer to operate unmanned aerial vehicles or drones. Drone technology is causing something of a revolution in military affairs, due in large part to the innovations emerging from the Ukrainian battlefield. This is definitely something to keep an eye on. There is little concrete evidence that the international arms community have been wowed by the arrival of the Su-57. Although international sanctions are unlikely to shut down the Su-57 program, lack of critical technology, funds, and buyers will likely continue to restrict the forward progress of the Su-57 project. Potential sales opportunities still look limited. Brazil dropped out in 2013, preferring to buy the Swedish Gripen and build it in Brazilian factories. India cancelled its deal with Russia over 5 years ago and is looking to build its own homegrown stealth fighter. Turkey was briefly interested. In 2019, an Su-57 turned up at a Turkish technology display in Istanbul, but announced in early 2020 that it too was now planning to build a homegrown stealth fighter. Algeria may receive some in a few years' time, and Iraq has expressed interest, but they will probably be watching Ukraine closely for evidence of the much-promoted stealth capability. But not all technological innovations leap straight from the drawing board and into a fully functioning and successful piece of equipment. We suggest that it would be too simplistic to write off the Su-57. It is a light, powerful, and agile aircraft with significant capabilities beyond other current Russian combat aircraft.
And some of the new design and technological features that emerged from Sukhoi's extensive development efforts seem to have cascaded down to the benefit of other Russian fighter systems. So perhaps we need to wait and see what happens later this year. F-16 fighters have been offered to the Ukrainian Air Force by Denmark and Norway. These will replace the aging Ukrainian MiG-29 and Su-27 fighters. Ukrainian pilots are already being trained on F-16s, and we may well see them take to the skies over Ukraine even as soon as this summer. But what do you think? Is it possible the Russian Air Force is holding back its small Su-57 fleet in anticipation of a conflict with American aircraft technology? This would suddenly take us beyond a Hollywood movie and into a real contest between American 4th-generation aircraft and Russian 5th generation. Is this likely to happen?